Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
Sweet dream. I didn't want to loosen my embrace, but the inner voice monotonously said, "Tony, get up. You'll sleep through the whole world again." He opened his eyes with difficulty, and his first conscious glance fell on the alarm clock. "Shit, it's 8:30. I was winding you up." The last phrase seemed to be addressed to the soulless clockwork that beat whenever it wanted to. Tommy gave the alarm clock a fist bump. "You've been doing a bad job lately, and you let me down a lot. I'm going to throw you out today." Apparently, the owner's threat had an instant effect on the old chronometer, because after the last phrase, the alarm clock made a hoarse sound. The man ironically remarked, "Well done, good for you. Only I turned you on at 7:30, and you woke up an hour later. That's it, I'm fucked now." Tony took a deep breath, yelled in a tongue-in-cheek voice, "My babies, rise and shine, Brittany ages. Get up." The process of dressing Tony, if you enter the observation from the outside, resembled a newsreel of the early 20th century. It took only 2 minutes for a young man and exemplary father to get dressed, get down and warm up, and Tony was glad that modern fashion trends freed him from the obligatory shaving in the morning. Otherwise, he would have had to spend another 5 minutes making his face look perfectly groomed, but the week-long stubble gave his image a bit of brutality that attracted women. There were sounds coming from the nursery, from which Tony could tell that his 2 daughters had already awakened and were in the active phase of getting ready for kindergarten. Just in case, he peeked into the boudoirs of his little princesses. The room was in almost perfect order, and the beds were even made. The latter fact particularly pleased the father, and he thought that the army regime he had established many years ago disciplined even the girls. To encourage his daughters, Tony in a voice said, "You are good girls, my little fairies, and for your obedience tonight, you will receive a prize. Tell me your secrets, what you want most of all." The girls jumped up and down and started shouting, "Ice cream, bighorn. No, take us to the zoo." Those childish wishes, the man's heart echoed with a surge of tenderness, and he kissed the girls with feeling. "You'll have ice cream in the zoo today, if you behave yourselves in the nursery." Lucy threw her father a condescending glance. "Daddy, we're big, and you talk to us like we're 3 years old." Although he didn't see much difference between the 2 ages. I had to hurriedly apologize. "I'm sorry, young lady, if I offended you. I didn't realize it was so important to you. By the way, all women want to look younger." Tony had long ago learned to do several things at once while talking to the kids. He brushed the girls' hair with practiced movements and made 2 ponytails on each head. Brittany, following her father's example during her morning styling, pulled on her tights. She was focused on a single thought and not distracted by extraneous conversations. So she was ready to go out earlier than her sister when the dressing process was complete. Brittany, too, gave her father a condescending look and voiced her own opinion. "Dad, it's an adult thing. Auntie's getting younger. Lucy and I are still growing up. And when we're big, it'll be different. Tony, you've always been surprised by your 6-year-old daughter's judgment. According to the maternity records, Brittany was born half an hour earlier than Lucy, so she was rightfully taking on the role of big sister. And she had no problem reprimanding her father. On this April morning, the girl decided to remind him of what was important. "Daddy, don't you think we're talking too much? In 10 minutes, Uncle Joe will close the gate and we'll be stuck at your work all day, just like last time." Tony sped things up. The prospect of spending the day with the twins didn't suit him. Since the job presented a whole host of additional problems, he didn't look at his watch to see if Brittany was right. He commanded in a cheerful voice, "6 girls. Our first priority is to get ahead of Uncle Joe." The twins took this call with enthusiasm. They rushed out of the apartment with loud shouts. Coincidentally, at the same time decided to lead their home neighbor on the floor. She glanced obliquely at the screaming girls, then gave Tony herself a cold look. In a cautionary tone, the woman made a remark. The uncontrolled behavior of children speaks of the irresponsibility of their parents. The man smiled. "Good morning, Margot. We are very pleased to see you too." The girls also greeted the older woman. "Hello." Brittany felt that one wish for health was not enough and added, "And we're going with Daddy tonight." Zoo, Margot said in the same arrogant tone. I'm very happy for you. She raised her eyes to the ceiling. In the elevator stall, I remember my parents took me to the theater when I was a kid. They tried from a young age to instill in me a love of beauty. I don't see how the zoo is better than the theater. Tony easily guessed that this question was addressed to him, and without hesitation answered the neighbor. Margot, contact with animals is also good for children's development because such contacts instill a love for our brothers and nature in general. The elevator stopped, and the doors slid apart with a squeal, letting the passengers out. The neighbor was very eager to argue. Hoping to continue the dialogue, she said, "It's a hackneyed formulation. It's only used when there's nothing to say." Tony turned around. Now I really have nothing to answer you, because evil Uncle Joe is about to slam the gates of the kindergarten. The man said this tirade in a distorted voice, and the girls squealed with delight again. Daddy, you're really good at this, like Carabas Barabbas from a fairy tale. Margot froze with amazement, because she, as a true connoisseur of art, was amazed by her neighbor's acting ability. She murmured in bewilderment, "It seems to me that this line is more reminiscent of the wolf true." The theater cashier did not specify what kind of wolf reminded her of the successful Tony. After all, this evil character is present in many fairy tales, and everywhere he is different. Leaving the neighbor in contemplation, the family sat down in the car, which last night the head of a friendly family thoughtfully left in the parking lot at the entrance. The way to the kindergarten with the romantic name of Rainbow took exactly 3 minutes. The frowning janitor was already closing the gate, but Brittany ran to the checkpoint. "Uncle Joe, wait please." The girl skirted into the narrow gap, called her sister. "Lucy, hurry up and move your legs, Daddy. We'll take it from here. You go to work, or she'll reprimand you." Tony watched his daughters, holding hands, walking down the path to the main building. It was heartwarming, and he thought, how quickly our girls are growing up. Too bad Sophia can't see it. His sad thoughts were interrupted by an unpleasant metallic clanking. It was Uncle Joe closing the gate in his own special way, wrapping an iron chain around the flaps. Noticing Tony's surprised look, the janitor said meaningfully, "This is the last time. I'm not that kind. Next time I won't let you in. We all have the same rules. I'm not going to make an exception for chronic offenders." For the first time in his life, Tony was put in that category. Getting into an argument with Uncle Joe wasn't on his mind as the clock inexorably counted down the seconds and minutes. Only in the parking lot outside the office did he glance fearfully at the face of the branded watch his father had recently given him for his 30th birthday. "Well, I'm 7 minutes late. Now the chief is going to give me his displeasure, and his speeches are going to make my toothache again." Tony had recently noticed that when he talked to his boss, he'd get a toothache for unknown reasons. So he even consulted a dentist he knew. But the dentist laughingly said, "Your teeth can be envied by anyone, and the pain is a kind of negative reaction like allergies." I had to take the specialist's word for it. Although the chief was the nicest man, he never evoked negative emotions in Tony. Tony was in his 9th year working for a company that provided a wide range of services to the public. Since he was one of the most experienced employees, the management entrusted him with the most responsible area, maintenance of several large firms. Despite the difficulties of such work, service engineer Tony was satisfied with it for 2 reasons. First, and most importantly, it is a decent salary, and the second, a convenient work schedule. The chief looked through his fingers at the systematic tardiness of his employee, because she knew the difficulties of his personal life. Barry would not wish even an enemy to stay with 2 young daughters in his arms. Therefore, he personally and their entire team, as they could, helped the lonely father. Only sometimes the manager reminded his subordinate Tony as a preventive measure, "I understand that it's hard for you and try to get into your position, but don't get too cocky. At least come to work on time, check in, and that's it. Do whatever you want. The most important thing for me is to keep my clients happy." No matter how hard Tony tried, he couldn't keep a schedule. In the mornings there was one or the other domestic emergency, and he was late for the office. He felt in his gut that today too, he had a good chance of getting into trouble. But no sooner had Tony reached his department than his cell phone rang. A familiar set of numbers popped up on the screen, and the young man whispered doomedly, "The chief's about to give me a full-blown beating." Barry gave Tony a short order. "Get over here now." With a heavy heart sat down, entered the reception area. The receptionist gestured that the chief was waiting for him. Barry was studying some documents. He took his eyes off the papers for a moment. Tony, you're like the Flying Dutchman. When I think of calling you, you've already vanished like Tony's ghost. Pleaded. Barry, you know I have special circumstances, and how long will you cover yourself with this excuse? Find a good woman, get married, and all your problems will disappear at once, and the girl will be a mom and himself a friend in life. Thank you for your helpful advice, but I don't have time to be distracted by novels, and my daughters are mature beyond their years. They'll go to school in the fall. It'll be easier then. The chief pointed to his desk. Sit down, there's no truth in your legs, and don't think I'm prying into your personal life. I just hate to see you fighting alone, but I called you in for a whole other reason. We have another big client coming in, and I don't want him off the hook. Take a look at these files and see what you can do for security. You're a pro at this, so you're the one I've decided to bring on board. Tony took the folder of documents and the chief continued with his client's wish list. You better study it at home. It'll be more reliable. I think you can do it in 2 days. You'll get some rest. Tony wasn't expecting such a generous gift from the chief. Barry, thank you. I never dreamed of a surprise like this. I guarantee that in exactly 48 hours, you'll receive a detailed plan from me. Barry interrupted impatiently. There's no hurry with the plan. Then you'll discuss the details personally with the customer. You will first present a list of proposals that I tell you. You know better than I do. Tony would have liked to answer the chief, but the latter, made with carelessness, waved his hand. All Tony, without taking up my time. As Tony took hold of the doorknob, Barry suddenly laughed. Wait a minute, Tony, you've got such a creditable last name. It's right of the money. It's right in the eye. Confess how you were teased at school. Tony felt himself blushing, but answered confidently. They were afraid to pick on me. It wasn't me, it was my dad. He was the head of the district police department and then the police. Wow, the expression on the chief's face changed dramatically, and he looked at Tony with respect. I won't keep you any longer. Good luck. Tony left the chief's office and exhaled with relief. He put the folder with the documents in the briefcase and headed to the department to warn his team. When he arrived, Sam sluggishly raised his hand in greeting. His friend and associate was chewing something with appetite, so he was unable to speak coherently and clearly. Tony dropped a heavy hand on his shoulder. Again, you're shoveling without leaving the cash register. And then crumbs all over the office. Sam, you've got to get out from behind your desk once in a while, because besides the virtual world, there's also the real world. His friend looked at him reproachfully. So, what was that just now? Are you trying to piss me off this morning on purpose? No, I'm just looking out for your health. All right then, I'll forgive you. It's the first time. The chief was looking for you this morning. I know, I already checked in with him. He sent me on a 2-day exile. Sam jumped on the spot. Man, some people are lucky. You're sitting here 24 hours a day, drowning yourself out so you don't rot. You gotta get out once in a while. All right, I'm out of here. I'll be in touch. Sam made another uncertain gesture with his hand and sank his teeth into what was wrapped in a white napkin. It emitted a bouquet of gastronomic aromas. Another helpful piece of advice to a friend. Sam, you be less into this kind of food. It's unhealthy, but it's delicious. Tony knew there was no use arguing with his friend. He decided not to waste time and ran out the door. His imagination was already drawing how he could spend the day pleasantly, with maximum benefit, but his fantasies were interrupted by a strange lady who got stuck in the turnstile at the entrance. Like a true gentleman, Tony helped the girl handle the naughty device, and she gave him a charming smile and gratitude. Thank you so much. If it weren't for you, I would have had to sit in captivity until tonight. Tony muttered. You wouldn't have. The guard is a real professional and saves those who can't pass the test at the entrance. Making nice with women was not in the young man's plans, and he hurried to the exit, casting a fleeting glance at this strange person. A thought flashed through his mind. It's the 21st century. Some people can't handle such a primitive device as a turnstile. Then he thought that the girl was probably from the backwoods, so she couldn't orient herself. But the appearance of this and casually met woman was not memorized, and soon he forgot about her altogether. Everything extraneous moved into the background, and he tried in advance to tune into a positive wave. For a man who single-handedly brings up 2 daughters, 2 days off seemed like a luxury. The only thing left to do was to properly dispose of this gift from the chief. Tony's mood soured a little when he ran into his driveway. By the elevator, he saw Margot's stubbornness. Forgetting that they had already met that morning, he cheerfully blurted out, "Good health to you." The neighbor gave him a hard look and then shook her head disapprovingly. "We've already met, and it was less than an hour ago. So young and such a short memory." Though it happens a lot to people who drink anything stronger than coffee in the morning. It took Tony a while to figure out what his neighbor suspected him of. And when he did, he wanted to send the old geezer away. But he restrained himself from being rude and said cheerfully, deliberately, "Don't judge yourself, Margot." The elevator rumbled to a halt, but Tony had no desire to go up to his floor in the company of an unpleasant neighbor. Even the mere thought of it caused a violent protest in his sensitive soul, and a whole squadron of goosebumps ran down his back. So Tony decided to set off on foot, and he overcame the first flight of stairs in some 2 seconds. This time was enough for Margot to understand the meaning of the last words said by the young neighbor. She had already managed to get into the elevator, and from there she shrieked at the whole entrance. "What are you implying you called me an Aki? Me, a sick woman who's old enough to be your mother? That's an insult. You know I'm going to complain about you." Tony ran up the stairs singing a light-hearted tune. Little revenge of the evil neighbor had lifted his spirits a little, but no sooner had he gotten into the apartment than his cell phone reminded him that modern man couldn't even temporarily become invisible. It was Tony's father calling. "You've completely forgotten I exist. You don't care whether your father is alive or dead." Tommy, after many years of working in the internal affairs, is used to demanding unquestioning obedience from his subordinates. The retired colonel had established exactly the same order in his family after his retirement. He couldn't part with this habit, though Tony asked his father to tone it down every time. This time, too, he remarked calmly enough, "Father, don't get on my nerves. You know I've got a lot on my plate." The father only released the pressure a little and muttered, "What kind of business can you have? Stalling all day long in your office in front of your computer. That's no job for a real man." "Dad, you're right, as always. A real man should be running around in attics and catching bandits." Tommy liked the joke and chuckled. "Tony, you know how to twist things in your own way. But thanks," laughed I. "Why am I calling you?" "I don't know. Why don't you tell me your secret? I have a new addition to my household. My nanny became a mom the other day. As I sat down, I felt a twinge of sickness." "Daddy, what are you talking about? What's nanny?" I heard the older man's cryptic laugh again. "Tommy, nanny is my young goat. I bought her last year in the neighboring village for next to nothing." Tommy exhaled with relief. "Thank God. I thought you got married." "That's a good idea. I'll have to think about it. When a man's in his 60s, he can still make a woman happy." There was the same characteristic chuckle, and then Tommy got serious and said, "All right, all kidding aside, son, I'm bored here alone. You should come up with your granddaughters for the weekend." "All right, Dad, we'll think about your invitation. I think the girls would love the prospect of babysitting a little goat. Besides a baby goat, I've got a surprise for them, and I've got a nice present for you too." There was such sadness in Tommy's voice that Tony felt a little uneasy. He thought that he rarely visited his father, especially lately. "Dad, I'll try." "No, I promise we'll come see you. I'll be waiting for you." His father disconnected first, but Tony still held the phone to his ear. After a few minutes of reflection, he reached a philosophical conclusion. Life is strange. We're all in a hurry, rushing around, trying to get a lot of things done, and in all the hustle and bustle we forget about the people who love us. For Tony, his father was the main authority from his childhood. His portrait, good frames, always stood on the programmer's desk. The young man winked at the image on the photo and quietly said, "Hold on, father. You and I will definitely break through. But first, I need to familiarize myself with this pile of papers, Tony." He carefully took out of his briefcase the folder that the chief had given him in the morning and began to go through the pages written in illegible handwriting. The contents of the documents puzzled him, and he often shrieked, "What nonsense! I wonder if the person who wrote this has the slightest idea about programming some notes of an insane person. The chief gave me a job. You could say he gave me a piggyback ride." Tony would have grabbed the phone to tell Barry what he thought about the new order, but at that moment his father's image appeared in front of him, and he uttered his crowning phrase. "Son, get it through your head. Orders from on high are not negotiable." Many times Tony and his father had argued about this issue, but Tommy always proved his point. If everybody does what they want, there'll be no order. That's why the country collapsed in the 90s, and the tragedy must not be allowed to happen again. All the right arguments were weak against this time-proven fact, although he himself remembered that period quite vaguely. But there are hard facts to prove that the bad years rolled over their family. Tommy was born and raised in what was considered a large village. His father, Rocky, was respected by the villagers because for more than a quarter of a century served as a district officer. Many times he stopped crimes, for which he received thanks from his superiors. But most of all, little Tommy was impressed by the barrel in the holster, which his father strapped to the flintlock. Rich childhood imagination drew the most exciting pictures of the fight with criminals, and Tommy gladly told these stories invented by himself to his school friends. The boy believed his own fantasies so much that he once wrote an essay about how his father had single-handedly apprehended a whole gang. The teacher appreciated the boy's creative abilities and gave him a mark. In addition to a bad mark, she decided to discourage Tommy from any desire to cheat and read out the child's essay in front of the whole class. But the classmates listened to the story with their mouths open. And when the teacher closed the notebook, one of the girls said, "Great." Leslie's classroom expected a very different reaction. She hoped the kids would condemn the liar, but everyone praised Tommy. What pissed her teacher off the most was that Casey Hent girl, an honor student and community leader. The liar sighed, and so the teacher decided to speak up. "Wow, Tommy and Conan Doyle. Hent girl, you couldn't have said it any more stupidly. How can you compare a classic of the detective genre with a trivial liar who uses her father's name so indiscriminately? Casey, not confused. In literature, there is always fiction. Even famous writers actively use this technique. By the way, Sherlock Holmes is a fictional character, although he had a prototype." The teacher didn't let the honor student finish. "Don't get smart, head girl, and don't try to defend Tommy." Leslie was not one to give up. She called Tommy's father to the school for a serious talk. Rocky listened patiently to the class teacher's grievances, and then out of the blue, he asked her, "I can read my son's essay." "Sure, no problem." Classmate Long rummaged through a stack of notebooks until she extracted the necessary copy and sarcastically said, "Here's your son's paper, read it." Rocky read his son's essay with interest. "What's wrong with it?" "Tommy's writing is clean and well written. I don't understand what you're complaining about." Leslie was worried because she'd gotten her assumptions wrong again. Raising her voice, she remarked, "I certainly understand your paternal feelings, but there is not a word of truth here." "How do you know that?" This question stumped the classroom teacher. The woman blinked her eyes, began to mutter, "But what your son wrote about simply can't be." "Leslie, how can you judge what you have no idea? And in general, I must tell you that you cannot break the wings of children on the takeoff. I'm not talking about my son. I'm talking about kids in general. A teacher should know about children's souls, and you." Rocky felt there was no point in talking to the class teacher any further. He left the classroom without saying goodbye. Leslie muttered angrily, "But the family too." "It's okay, I won't let it go. This Tommy, I'm going to dance." After that incident, the class began to pick on Tommy for no reason. Her daily nagging got so bad that one day he said, "I don't want to go to this school." Rocky tried to calm the teenager down. "Tommy, you're a man. Pull yourself together, and I'll try again to talk to your teacher." The boy objected. "No, Dad, don't, because you'll make it worse. I already have an idea. You better help me transfer to another school." "Tommy, there's only one school in the village." "School? So I'll ride my bike to the next village." Rocky gave in and asked the principal of the school in the neighboring village, who he knew well, to enroll his son. A week later, Casey Headgirl transferred to the school. A fellow student immediately warned Tommy, "Don't think I left because of you. I'm just always in favor of justice." In the fall and spring, the teenagers got to the village school on bicycles, and in the trackless winter, Tommy's father drove them to the place of study. Rocky often repeated the proverb. In those years in the decaying West, young people actively fought injustice. This fighting spirit slowly penetrated through the Iron Curtain and in the country of victorious socialism. Therefore, many representatives of the younger generation tried to prove their elders right from the school bench in such an unconventional way. However, over time the fighting spirit faded, and Tommy and Cassie made quite realistic plans for adulthood. Having safely finished 10 years of school, the friends separated in different directions. Casey went to university to study chemical engineering, and Tommy decided to continue his father's noble work. After police school, he was sent back to his native land. For almost 3 years, he worked as a district police officer in that very same village, in the neighboring village where he went to school. He liked the work, but was not satisfied with the scale, and he decided to consult his father. "Dad, I have respect for any business, but I want to fully realize myself." Rocky had no choice but to advise his son. "If you do not feel satisfied with the work of the precinct, enter the academy, while the age still allows." That same fall, Tommy entered a higher educational institution, and after graduating from the academy, his career went sharply upward. First, he was promoted to deputy chief of one of the regional divisions, and later he became head of that division. While Captain Tommy's service was excellent, his personal life was lacking. At the age of 30, he walked in the bachelor's. His parents kept telling their son, "Tommy, you and your job are gonna be alone." He usually turned it into a joke, citing lack. "No time, no woman would want to share me with my work." But such a brave girl was found. She turned out to be Casey's high school friend, the former head girl. The classmates met by chance in a department store in the regional center. They wanted to talk, reminisce about high school, so Tommy took Casey's phone number, promising, "I'd call you as soon as I got off work." Casey waited impatiently for the call. She too had failed to build her family nest because she considered work to be the most important thing in her life. But as she grew older, her values changed, and Casey was surprised to realize that personal happiness was the most important thing for a woman. But since all of her friends were already married, and some of them were even divorced, Casey suffered from loneliness in the evenings and on holidays. When she met Tommy, with whom she had been secretly in love in her youth, a flame of hope flickered in her heart. She waited patiently for his call. But Tommy did not show up until 2 weeks later. He apologized and then laughingly told her not to have another force majeure. "I'm inviting you to the restaurant right now. I think we'll be comfortable there in a relaxed atmosphere." Casey agreed, did not hesitate the young woman, and later, when forever busy, the beau proposed. "Casey, you and I are quite mature people, so I'll say it straight, let's live together." Noticing a shadow running across the girl's face, he added, "I'm sorry, I clumsily expressed myself. I don't know how to speak beautifully. In a word, I ask you to become my wife." Casey agreed. A month later they were married, and 6 months later they moved into a 2-bedroom apartment. Although the housing was departmental, it didn't matter much to the young family, and soon the couple had their firstborn son Tony. It was the first family trip by their own vehicle. At first Tony wanted to use the train, but he realized that he would have to spend almost half a day on the road, and changed his mind. When choosing a mode of transportation, the caring father considered the age of his daughters and their increased activity. He knew that his girls would not be able to stay in one place for long and would run around the car, annoying other passengers, and he thought, although there were many risks, it would be faster to get there on the road. When he told his daughters that they were going to Grandpa's in their own car, Lucy performed an acrobatic stunt with joy. "Yay, we're going to Grandpa's house in Daddy's car." Brittany was more relaxed about the upcoming trip and even gave her father some sound advice. "Daddy, we should stop by the mall to buy Grandpa a present. You can't go on a visit without a present." Tony thought that Brittany would make a real hostess because he had missed this important moment and his daughter had reminded him. He thought sadly of Sophia again, who had died so ridiculously because of her own carelessness. Memories of his wife, whose marriage lasted only 3 years, always painfully responded to the heart, but this pain with time dulled. The saddest thing was that Tony over the years began to realize that their fleeting marriage was a man's mistake. He often found himself thinking, "Sooner or later Sophia and I would have broken up because we were too different." Perhaps it was the realization of this mistake that prevented Tony from deciding to make a second attempt to arrange his own personal happiness. For all 4.5 years, the young widower only once dared to make Anthony with a colleague at work. But Nancy very quickly disappointed him when in the company of careless comments on family happiness. "Personally, I don't believe in fairy tales about love. It's all invented from naive suckers who need to flatten the demographic curve. In my mind, the driving factor in building a family is material well-being. When people have money, they can afford a certain level of comfort. And the more money, the more cozy life is. And when a person is as comfortable as possible, they try to keep it all." Sam then objected. "Nancy, listen to you. A man doesn't need anything but a good meal and a warm bed. This primitive existence seems to me to satisfy creatures accustomed to a parasitic way of life. I forgot all about children. and children are the main incentive for creating and maintaining a family. She listened to Sam and snorted contemptuously. From your information, Sam, many couples refuse to have children at all, and there are many advantages to that decision. Nancy wanted to elaborate further, but Sam shut her up with a single phrase. I hate to have a life partner like you, Nancy, and it's a good thing that most women are chatty and willing to spill everything in their heads. You can tell who you're dealing with. Nancy then took great offense at Sam, and Tony hurriedly rolled up the just-started Anthony. The girl was surprised by the abrupt change in the mood of her admirer and even demanded an explanation from him, without going into details. Tommy, Nancy replied calmly, it won't work. We have nothing because you don't believe in love, but I do. You don't like children, and I have 2 daughters. Tony, it's not like I have anything against your girls. You could hire a governess, your salary allows it. My girls need a mom. He and Nancy were over for good, but there was still a lingering residue with the young man's soul after the brief affair. Of course, Tony was not going to lead a monastic lifestyle, but dreamed of meeting a simple and kind woman who could become a mother for twins. And the older the daughters grew, the more often this thought visited the lonely father. He thought about a settled life and during a trip to the neighboring region, where the father decided to live the rest of his life. For the first half of the trip, the girls occupied themselves with games, then they tired of the fun and fell asleep. Tony kept the speed limit to a minimum, so as not to disturb the little princess's sleep, and by the end of the trip he was so tired that he almost fell over when he got out of the car. Tommy welcomed the guests at the gate of his small but very well-kept estate. His granddaughters immediately captured his grandfather's attention. They bombarded him with questions. Grandpa, where's the goat? He already knows how to walk, and we can play with him. The retired colonel had time to answer questions and at the same time set the table. Tony watched these preparations and his eyes gradually fell asleep. The last thing he heard were his father's words. Brittany, Lucy, let your daddy rest a little after the road, and you and I will go. We'll see what our goat is doing. Tony thought his father had picked a good name for the baby goat. After that thought, he completely disconnected from reality and fell into a pleasant half-sleep. He dreamed of his mother dying at the hands of bandits. Then the image of Sophia flashed through his mind. He even had time to think in his dream that there was some evil horn over the men of the family, because his grandmother had not died of her own accord at a very young age. The same sad fate awaited his mother and then his wife. He didn't have time to finish that thought because his father touched his shoulder lightly. Tony, enough sleep. It's time for us to have a bite to eat and a little drink. For the sake of the meeting, of course we'll have a drink. Just let me wake up. He tried to pull himself out of a sweet reverie and mumbled, it's mystical. Thank you, Father, for waking me up because I had such a bad dream. And what or who you saw? You won't believe it, Father. First I dreamed about my grandmother, then about my mother, a little creepy, because I didn't even think about them. Old people say you dream about the dead when the weather changes. It's probably gonna rain. It's on TV, and my barometer says so. Tony jabbed his finger at a compass-like device hanging on the wall. Tony got up from the chair in which he had been caught by sleep. To finally regain consciousness, the man began to actively knead his stiff joints, sharing his worries with his father. I didn't think I'd take this trip so hard. It's not surprising. You're all around the city, 5 minutes and you're there. I'm a little wary of traveling long distances myself, but I've had more experience than you. Tommy prepared to tell his son about the hardships of farm life, but Tony looked worried. Father asked, where are the girls? You can't leave them alone or they'll get into trouble. Older Tommy grinned. Don't put too much fear in the granddaughters under good care. Tommy winked enigmatically and beckoned to his son. Come with me and see what fun they're having. Just be quiet, don't scare it all away. You better to step by step followed his father through the labyrinth of narrow passages. His father had always impressed him with his unconventionality, and when he decided to become a farmer after his violent police days, Tony had made him laugh. Father, you can't live in the country. You can't live the quiet, measured life either. Take offense or not, I don't believe you make a farmer. Tommy didn't argue the point, but he wisely said, I'm a little doubtful myself, but we'll see. From his last duty station, the retired colonel went straight to his native land. He signed over the apartment in the regional center to his son. You're young, it's more convenient for you to live in the city, but I'll find a shelter in the village. It's peaceful there. True, there's almost nothing left of the village where he grew up. His parents' house was in such a state of disrepair that it was frightening to enter. Tommy grieved for a while and went to the local authorities for advice. The officials were sympathetic to the retired officer's plight and promised to help him in any way they could. Tommy was allocated a plot of land next to his stepfather's house, and then everything went as usual. The man cleaned up the house, built 2 barns. For these transformations, the man spent all his savings, but did not grieve about it. When his son offered to send him money, he said firmly, "Thank you, Tony, for your participation, but I'll manage on my own. I'll farm." Tommy got some rabbits because of his experience with these animals. A little later, Tommy decided to expand his farm and got 2 goats, and last year he got another one, which gave him a baby goat named Birdie. As a former internal affairs officer, Tommy could not afford to have nameless individuals living in his agency. Therefore, everything, including rabbits, chickens, and goats, had personalized nicknames. Hearing his daughter's giddy squeals from afar, Tony headed resolutely in the direction of those sounds, but Tommy whispered, "Wait, don't be in a hurry. Come here and see what they're doing." Tony followed his father's hand and could hardly contain his laughter. The sisters were riding a baby goat on a baby scooter, and 3 adult goats were watching. It seemed that Milka and Beverly were also eager to ride. Only Nani, Birdie's mom, was mewing loudly and glancing anxiously at the girls. Lucy explained the young mother, "You don't be afraid, Nani, he won't fall, but we'll teach him to ride, and then Birdie's grandfather will take him to the circus." The men looked at each other. "Oh, Tony," asked the father, "admit it, you're the one who made the plans." "No, they made them all up themselves. They're all fantasists and grandpa." This conclusion Tony made with pride, but his moment of glory was short, because the son asked, "If I understand correctly, this is your surprise to your granddaughters. Besides the goat, you decided to get them scooters," the colonel smiled. "That's right. Is my gift bad?" "No, it's a good gift. All the kids in our town ride on such things. Dad, you're gonna surprise me with something. By the way, you said that the girls are under supervision, but I don't see anyone but a goat in the vicinity." The elderly man took his eyes away and began fidgeting with the gardening tools. This behavior made the son suspicious. "Admit it, your father's up to something else." Tommy looked around as if he wanted to make sure he wasn't being followed. Then he cautiously peeked around the corner. "Lee, where have you gone?" Very close by, and a pleasant female voice sounded. "Here I am, Tommy. I decided to clean up the barn a little." Before Tony could blink his eyes, a pretty young woman appeared. Her blonde hair was braided into a tight braid, and a healthy blush smoldered on her cheeks. For a moment it seemed to Tony that he had accidentally traveled back in time, for there was nothing of the modern woman in this Lee. The young man was shocked, and the girl smiled openly and held out her hand. "Lee, and I had imagined you quite differently to him." He did not want to seem ignorant, and he lightly shook the girl's hand. "I wonder what I looked like in your imagination." Lee made a loud sound like a giggle. "I thought that you were all so advanced, all computer specialists not of this world. I work at the post office, and we also had one from the city. He installed a program for us. And what impressed you, that comrade?" Lee sank her gaze languidly. "He told me all sorts of stories and even invited me to the club for a disco. It was a pity that he left the next day." Tony looked around, hoping to find his father. He had already realized what the old man was up to, and he wanted to speak up. Lee was still standing near the barn where his father had made a shelter for the goats. She changed the subject. "You have wonderful girls. If it's no secret, where is Mom?" Tony replied with irritation. "We don't have a mom, she died." Lee's eyes widened. "Ah, yay. Tell me how it happened." Tony felt that one more question, and he would be on the hammer of this Lee. After all, no one, even the closest friends, did not dare so brazenly prying into his soul. Luckily, Tommy showed up just in time. "But what young people?" "Well, you've met them. It's time to eat. Brittany, Lucy, let Birdie rest. Come on inside." Brittany grabbed the goat and dragged it into the barn. Lucy followed her sister and reprimanded her. "That's not fair. I feel like cheering for the goat too. Do you think that if you're older, you can do anything? Why do you whine all the time?" We'd agreed we'd take turns babysitting Birdie. Everyone could see that a scandal was brewing. Tony decided to bring his daughters to their senses. "Stop it right now. If you fight, Grandpa won't let you play with the goat tomorrow, and he'll take the scooters back." Brittany squinted her eyes. "Daddy, you're scaring us. Gifts are forever. Tommy mentally marveled again at the cleverness of his eldest daughter. The dinner passed in a pleasant atmosphere. Life felt like a hostess in her father's house and ran from the kitchen table. Tommy guessed that she was the one who had prepared so many simple but very tasty dishes. He felt embarrassed for having been rude to this woman. Wanting to correct his mistake, he began to ask the young woman about village life. Lee willingly shared her experiences with him. When I was young, I also dreamed of running away to the city. I got a job at the post office and got used to it, no matter how you look at it. But someone has to live in the village too. The only bad thing is that there are very few men. Lee again looked at all the conclusions with undisguised hope, but he pretended not to notice this expressive look. As the family dinner dragged on, Tommy had to walk Lee home. He saw the triumphant gleam in his father's eyes. Returning from his night out, Tony pounced on Tommy. "Dad, you should have at least warned me. I'm not a boy to be set up like this." The older Tommy went on the attack. "What's wrong with Lee? She's a good woman, not spoiled by city life. You go through too much, you'll end up lonely like me." His father's voice trembled, and Tony felt sorry for the old man. He put his arm around his shoulders. "I'm sorry, father, but this sweetest woman is not my type. You're a man, and you must understand that I like other women." "I understand. I just wanted to help you. I'm very afraid, son, that you're going to be like me." "Well, we'll talk tomorrow. We'll have time. But now it's time for bed." Tony saw his father walk over to the sideboard and stare at his mother's portrait for a long time. Tommy had been very young when Casey died. His father had told him the details of this family tragedy when he was in college. Casey was among the first merchants who decided to live under the new rules. The woman knew perfectly well that she agreed to these rules. You have to give part of the proceeds to those who keep the roof. But she believed that her husband's position was a reliable guarantee for her, so she categorically refused to fulfill this condition. This liberty was not forgiven her, and she died right on the landing outside the apartment. Her husband and son heard strange rumbling noises, but when they ran out onto the landing, it was too late. Casey died in her husband's arms. Before she died, she managed to say, "Tommy, take care of yourself and your son." So the perpetrators were caught and sentenced for a long time, but the family suffered an irreparable loss. It's been almost a quarter of a century. Tommy never recovered. The man couldn't imagine another woman by his side. 2 days at Grandpa's house flew by like a blink of an eye. The girls enjoyed the rambunctious country life so much that they didn't want to go home. On the eve of their departure, Brittany took the bait. "Daddy, you said we were big with Lucy." Tony immediately recognized his daughter's trickery, but didn't let on. "Of course we are. In the fall, you'll go to school." "Daddy, what if we're big? We can stay at Grandpa's for a while." "No, daughter, you can't." "Why not?" "Because Grandpa's old, and he can't take care of you alone." "We'll help Daddy. We'd already know how to take care of the goats, and the rabbits don't resent us. You know, Lucy even held one in her arms, and he wasn't afraid." "I'm very happy for you, but we have to go home. You have to go to daycare, and I have to go to work, and we'll visit Grandpa in the summer. Your birdie will be older by then." This promise calmed the girls a little, and he heard the sisters sewing beautiful clothes for the goat, in which he would later perform in the circus. The short vacation was good for the young father's morale. Tony felt a rush of energy and strength as he walked leisurely up to his floor on Monday morning. Sam stared at him in surprise. "Tony, you're all right?" "Yeah. Why are you asking me that weird question?" "Because you're on time today. I figured something happened on the trip." Tony sat next to me. "You know, you're not far from the truth. My father decided to take care of me and had a viewing party. He found what he thought was a suitable bride in the village, and I had to spend the whole evening making nice with her." Sam was thrilled to hear the news. "So congratulations to you." "Tony," he said, "I guess I'm used to this kind of life, where everything is clear, everything is the same. On the one hand, you're right, but on the other hand, without women, this world is not interesting." "I'm a mooch." "When was the last time you went on a date?" Sam looked straight into Tony's eyes. "You're not gonna believe this, but it was yesterday. It was hardly a full-fledged date, though." Sam got serious. "I'll tell you in the pictures what it was like. Anyway, I ran out to lunch 5 minutes early and ran into a lady right at the front door. She was hanging around, probably waiting for someone. So I bumped into her. I apologize. She's smiling and looking at me, giving me a look that made my heart pound. 'Sam, I don't think it's your heart. It's probably your insatiable stomach. I can't rule that out. You're distracting me from the subject. Anyway, she and I ran into each other like two oncoming trains in a narrow tunnel. I apologize, of course. She asked me for directions to the principal's office. I walked her to the chief's office and then went to the pie shop. I get back to the office and she's walking down the alley. So I joined her, and that all seemed like a good place to start. We talked about everything. Did she leave you her phone number too? No. She says she lost her cell phone the other day and hadn't bought a new one yet. Tommy patted his buddy on the shoulder. That's Sam, a subtle hint of thick circumstances. I think you've fallen for a divorce lover. Come on, Tony, you think everything's a setup. No offense, but I'm worried about you. You're so gullible. It's a piece of cake. Sam didn't say anything and stared at the monitor. Tony decided to get busy too and went into his office. He devoted the whole first half of the day to the new order. He had to contact the client to clarify some things, and after a short conversation on the phone, he promised to come to the office in the afternoon so that the business meeting would not be disrupted. Tony decided to reschedule the meal for later in the day. Sam was worried about his comrade. Tony, hunger makes a person irritable and angry. If it's hard for you to get out of your chair, I can bring a snack to your office. Tony waved his arms. Thanks, Sam, but don't bother. Imagine the stench in the office even after a light snack. I want to make a positive impression on my client, and for that, it's worth it. Well, see for yourself. Sam went to the place of eating, and Tony again delved into the study of documents. The client arrived exactly as scheduled. They discussed the new project for about an hour, after which the visitor suggested to Tony, Tony, I think you better see what's what. The thing is that there are some nuances, architectural peculiarities of the building that our firm is renting. I think that's important to consider. Tony considered the client's proposal reasonable and agreed to go on site. He noticed a young woman in the public garden near the office who looked like Sam's acquaintance. A thought flashed through his mind. That's what love does to people. Poor girl is waiting for her lover, and he doesn't even know it. Tony even wanted to call a comrade, but changed his mind because it was uncomfortable to have extraneous conversations in front of the client. He thought, nothing, I'll come back, then I'll make him happy. But soon Tony completely forgot about his friend's budding romance and everything else because he spent the rest of the day in the customer's office. The building was indeed full of unpleasant surprises. Tony realized sadly that he would have to fundamentally change his very approach to the design of the project. The client asked in an apologetic tone, Be honest, Tony, we've given you a problematic problem. As Tony was obliged to keep his company's brand, he optimistically replied, Every problem has a solution, but of course you'll have to do a lot of thinking. We'll pay for it, you could be sure of that. We just don't have any other options. And please, if you can, make the project as soon as possible, because without reliable protection, we risk every day. Tony, I assured the clients, I'll do my best. He didn't want to return to the office, but he remembered that his car was left there in the service parking lot. Tony was in a hurry because he had to pick up the girls from daycare. He wanted to skip past the public garden, but he noticed the young woman he had met in the afternoon. What a strange person, lingering here all day. I wonder what she wants. These thoughts, running into each other, raced through his mind and disappeared. He didn't even look at the stranger, and only in the car he remembered that he had seen her somewhere before. Tony began to replay the events of the last few days. It hit him. This is the same woman I helped with the turnstile at the entrance last week. It's interesting, it's very interesting. There's a reason this lady is leaning outside our office for days on end, so she has a purpose. The next morning, the stranger was not in her usual place, but in the evening she was strolling through the square again. Tony wanted to interrogate the lady to the point of pain in his knees, but he passed her by again. This ridiculous game frightened the man and at the same time added adrenaline to his blood. Just in case, he asked Sam, Remember what I told you about the girl I met at the entrance? How are you getting on with her? Sam waved his hand in despair. Nothing. She never called me. It's been a week and I don't think it's worth waiting for her to call. Tony really wanted to reassure his comrade, but he could not do it because he realized that the stranger was after him. It remained to find out the reason that made her follow the modest service engineer, and such a case soon presented itself. All week the sisters had been looking at their grandfather's gifts. Tony believed that the most convenient place for scooters was the hallway, Therefore, the suffering of the girls twice a day, morning and evening, reached a critical point. On Friday, the situation reached a climax, and the sisters began to pester Daddy. "We're so excited to go for a ride. Why won't you let us go out of the yard?" Tony calmly explained. "In the yard, such fun is dangerous because there are cars running around all the time. Wait until Sunday, we'll go to the park with you and you can go for a ride." The sisters cheered up a little, and Brittany asked again to make sure. "You're not going to cheat us, are you?" "Have I ever lied to you?" "No." "Then I'll keep my promise this time too." The twins barely waited for the day off, so that their father wouldn't change his mind and deprive them of their outing for bad behavior. They clearly followed all his instructions. After breakfast, the sisters dressed themselves and with shining faces went out into the hallway. "Daddy, we're ready." Tony was delighted with his own parenting methods. He hadn't expected that the right motivation for children could produce such amazing results. Looking at the girls with a critical eye, he said cheerfully, "But I must say, well done. Grab your scooters and let's go." The sisters scrambled up the stairwell with happy shouts. No sooner had Tony pressed the elevator button than Margot's curly head appeared from the next apartment. The woman had once again forgotten that polite people say hello when they meet. She immediately made a strong protest. "I wondered why there was such a noise in our house that made my head hurt. It's my neighbors rollerblading around the apartment." While Margot was talking to Tony and the girls were loading into the elevator, the neighbor slowed down a little and was squeezed by the automatic doors on both sides. She freed herself, but looked at Tony askew. "I'm asking you to clean up your living space." "Margot, I assure you, we're in order and no one's rollerblading around the apartment. By the way, this wheeled device is called a scooter. Grandpa gave it to his granddaughters when we went to visit him." Margaret's eyes lit up, and she looked at the girls with fondness. "They are so cute. No wonder Grandpa spoils them. My grandchildren are far away from home, and they rarely visit." The elevator reached its terminus. All the passengers rushed to the exit at the same time. Tony said calmly, "Girls, you have forgotten that you have to let the older ones go first." The sisters gave way to their neighbor. Margot finally melted. "Well done. Obey Daddy." Praise for the neighbor encouraged the sisters. Brittany even took a step closer to the neighbor. "You're kind too. Come and visit us. We'll tell you about our grandpa. He has a farm with goats and rabbits." "Oh my God, that's so cute." Tony looked at his neighbor and wondered how a smile transforms a man. The grumpy woman looked 10 years younger, and her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Margot, really, come over for tea tonight. We've lived next door for so many years. We only meet at the elevator." "Thanks for the invitation, Tony. I'll be there. I'll make cheesecakes." A short conversation with a neighbor added positive emotions, and the family in a wonderful mood went to the park, where Sunday life was already in full swing. Young children were digging sandboxes, and older children were riding down the slides. There were young owners of scooters in the park. Some rode on their own, and beginners mastered this type of transportation under the supervision of their mothers. Tony, encouraging his daughters, "You can do it yourself, or I can help you." Lucy twisted in a chuckle. "Daddy, you think we were kindergartners. Now we're going to show you how to race against the clock. Don't do that, or you'll knock your noses off. In short, ride here where I can see you, and without fanaticism." Tony struggled to find a vacant seat on a bench near the fountain and began to watch the vacationers in the park. He was so engrossed in this activity that he didn't notice how his daughters disappeared from his sight. He had to go in search of them. It turned out that the sisters had already managed to find friends, the same young scooter riders. Children arranged a competition, and happy parents watched their children with awe. However, there was only one man in this company of fans. The moms looked at him meaningfully, and Tony got along in the crossfire of women's gazes. Suddenly, a familiar silhouette flashed through the female crowd, and Tony felt uneasy. He wondered if she was really here. The man looked around, but he didn't see any strange ladies. His mood immediately went down, and an incomprehensible anxiety crawled into his heart. "Girls, we have to go home. Next Sunday, we'll come here again." He expected the girls to whine, but they rolled toward the park exit. The sisters got ahead of their father and started whispering about something, waiting for him. Tony only heard Brittany's last sentence. "Don't say anything to Dad," Lucy realized. Accordingly, she nodded her head. But from her pouty lips, her father realized that the girl did not like the pressure from her older sister. After lunch, the girls wanted to watch cartoons, and that's when someone rang the doorbell. Brittany rushed into the hallway. "Daddy, I'll get it." It must be the neighbor who came to visit. Lucy also ran to meet the guest, and Tony was changing channels, trying to find the one with the cartoons. The hallway was suspiciously quiet, so he called out to his daughters. "Girls, where did you disappear to?" The sisters returned to the living room, surprise frozen on their faces. He asked cheerfully, "And who's here to see us?" Brittany stammered and whispered. "Daddy is their auntie we saw in the park today." Lucy pulled her sister aside. "Daddy, she said she was our mommy. She bought us presents, but we wouldn't take them without your permission." Tony felt a nauseous lump roll up his throat. He closed the living room door tightly, ordering his daughters, "Stay here," and rushed into the hallway. The woman who had been following him for days stood with 2 bags in her hands and smiled confusedly. It was this innocent smile that pissed the man off the most. He moved toward the stranger. "Maybe you can explain what all this means. A whole week you've been following me, and now you break into my house and say something ridiculous." "And the guest," she whispered. "I am the girl's real mother, and that's the truth." Tony clenched his fists. "Don't you dare make such sacrilegious remarks in my house. The girl's mom died when they were very young, and I'm the only one raising my daughters." The woman grabbed his arm. No, it's not what you think it is. Hear me out, please." Bright lightning flashed before the man's eyes. He swung the front door open. "Get out of here and don't ever come near me again. If I see you outside my house or my office again, I'll report you." He shoved the insolent woman out the door and slammed it shut. In the middle of the hallway stood 2 bags of presents. Curiosity got the better of him. He looked inside the bags. Each contained a nicely wrapped doll and inexpensive candy. Tony opened the door again and set the gifts out. "Take your goodies." But the woman was no longer on the landing, and Margot's voice came from the neighboring apartment. "She left. She took the elevator just now." The door of the neighboring apartment opened slightly. Margot waited impatiently for an answer, and Tony spread his hands in confusion. "I have no idea who she is, but she's definitely not right in the head. You know, Tony, there are so many crooks these days. Even women going door to door, saying they've got the wrong address and looking for something to eat. They wait for the owners to leave and take everything. One of my friends was clean to the ground, even just used towels. They didn't hesitate to take them." Tony listened to his neighbor, but he was thinking about something else. He understood that this strange woman did not appear by chance. But why she decided to make such a strange statement now was unclear. Of course, it would be easier to write it all off as a problem with the lady's head. But if her words hid the truth, he was most afraid that the answer to this question would be positive. Their father's mood was transmitted to the twins. The rest of the day was surprisingly quiet. Tony was busy preparing dinner and couldn't get rid of the thought that there was something unusual about that woman that he hadn't noticed. He went over the details of recent events again and again. The strenuous mental work caused only a headache, but the man never found an answer to the question that plagued him. In the evening, as promised, Margot dropped in for a visit. Communication with a neighbor, to Tony's surprise, lowered the degree of tension. They sweetly talked on general topics, told everything about the father. The girl also contributed and shared with the neighbor their personal experience of raising little goats. Margot had no time to explain. What a beauty! And here we are, living in the city, escaping from boredom. I'm a country girl too, but my parents worked on construction sites around the country, and then they took me to the city. So I've lived here all my conscious life. As we were saying goodbye, my neighbor said, "Tony, if you have an urgent need, I can babysit your girls." "Thank you, I will definitely take advantage of your offer." The sisters saw the benefit of Margot's words. "And you show us the theater," the woman assured them. "I will, if Papa will let me. If you want, I can reserve tickets for you and the partner for the children's play." The girls started jumping up and down with excitement. "That's great. We're going to the theater to see the fairy tale, Daddy. It's as exciting as the circus, I guess, but I don't know for sure." Tony was about to close the front door behind his neighbor when Margot turned around. "Although I didn't get a good look at your guest, I thought your older girl looked a lot like her. At first, I even thought that a relative had come to visit you." "The man was overcome with fever," he whispered. "That answers my question. I couldn't understand what got me so excited, but it meant that Tony didn't want to think about the fact that this woman had told the truth. He was scared to even imagine the consequences for his family with this revelation. No, it can't be. Sophia couldn't have lied to me. I'm sure they're my daughters. But the seed of doubt had already fallen on fertile soil and began to germinate rapidly. All night, the young father did not sleep a wink. He settled in the kitchen in front of the open window and one by one and smoked cigarettes. Tony had gotten rid of this addiction when he was a student, but a strong shock forced him to smoke. Tony was one of the few who graduated from the university with a red diploma. Even during his studies, he took part in various competitions and not once returned with a victory. Therefore, in his last year of study, the dean's office made him an offer that any student would not be able to refuse. Tony, stay in graduate school, then you will defend yourself and teach in the native walls. Tony thought about it, talked to his father, and agreed. For about a year, he faithfully performed his job duties, and the young man's diligence was soon rewarded. One day, he was summoned by the rector. Tony, how would you like to go on an internship in Germany? Tony was even speechless with surprise. He blinked his eyes frequently and smiled dully. The rector laughed. Judging by your reaction, you agree? Oh, yes, of course. Well then, settle your affairs and prepare the documents. Lucky shared his unexpected joy with his father, who at that moment was relentlessly fighting crime in the Far East. He'd also told about it to his girlfriend, with whom he had been dating for 2 months. But contrary to expectation, Sophia took this news without much enthusiasm. Tony, how is it that you leave me alone at the mercy of fate? And I thought that we are all serious. Although the guy did not understand the reason for the discontent of his favorite girl, he assured her, "You know, I don't give up on flings." "Then take me with you." "I'd love to, but it requires a passport stamp." Sophia wasn't gonna back down. "Then let's sign right now." The girl was determined, and Tony was fascinated by her willingness to share the difficulties of life with him. Then he thought that this was the kind of girl who was worthy of becoming his wife. They went to the registry office in the hope that it would quickly formalize their relationship, given the special circumstances. At the head of the department grinned. "You think you're the only one so clever here? Everyday couples come here who have valid reasons, and we all have to refuse, because there is a law. So my soon-to-be newlyweds, you'll have to wait, and then we'll marry you. And I'll take your application right now." Failure disappointed both of them, but they were still hoping for a trip together. Tony's papers were already ready, and Sophia was waiting and nervous. The reason for the excitement was not only the delay in preparing the documents, but also the unplanned pregnancy. Of course, she wanted a baby, but not now. That's why Tony only found out just before she left that he was about to become a daddy. "Sophia, you have no idea what this news means to me. It's not just joy, it's bottomless happiness." Their wedding was held in an unusual format and resembled something between a marriage and christening of a child not yet born. Older guests at first tried to enlighten the groom, who only talked about his son. "Tony, you can't do that. It's bad luck. I don't believe in omens." Tommy came to his son's wedding from the Far East, but he did not share the enthusiasm. The colonel was an excellent physiognomist and immediately saw in his daughter-in-law a hunter of fat purses. Sophia behaved very defiantly. She greedily gazed into every respectable man, and there were many such among the invitees from the groom's side. Then, when the wedding fanfare rattled, Tommy asked his son, "Tony, what do you know about Sophia?" The son immediately let out a barb. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you had to look into the bride's file before getting married. You are not forced to dig into the entanglements of her biography, but at least elementary information about the person with whom you are going to live the rest of your life. It would not hurt to know where is Sophia from, where she studied, who are her parents." These simple questions then put the happy newlywed in a deadlock, and he was horrified that he really knew nothing about his young wife. Even at the very beginning of their acquaintance, the girl told him a story reminiscent of a soap opera. If you believe this story, the girl was raised by a poor aunt. There was no money for education. She graduated from college, got a profession as a cook. Then an acquaintance of the aunt helped the poor orphan to get a job in a good restaurant, where she began to receive a decent salary. Although many things in this tale didn't add up, Tony believed Sophia. He never gave importance to small things. He was not surprised that a girl of such a modest profession had a rather rich closet. Perfect manicure also did not correspond to the legend, as well as the habit of throwing away money. Tony was just happy and was ready to do anything for the sake of the woman he loved, who was to become the mother of his child in a few months. Seeing her husband off to his internship was touching. Sophia was in tears and begged, "Tony, my love, you just come back soon. I can't imagine how I will be alone without you. The young husband reassured his wife. You, most importantly, do not worry. Take care of yourself and our baby. I hope that I will be able to come to the birth. The young woman asked him a question. What if you can't? He was confused because this option had not even been considered. While the young man was thinking of what to answer, Sophia frowned prettily as if in jest and said, Just try not to come, then you will not be able to get rid of me easily. You will have to pay a very high price. Sophia, I'll fulfill your every wish and even buy you a car. I saw a little red car in the showroom that looks like a ladybug. He kissed her on the tip of her nose. You'll have such a cute car, I promise. Sophia saw her husband off and stayed alone in his 3-room apartment. Tony called her every day from Germany, worried about her health. She delighted in telling her husband how their baby was doing. The delivery date was inexorably approaching, and Sophia hoped that at this important moment in her life, her husband would be by her side. Tony was promised a 2-week vacation, but Sophia went into premature labor. When he called to warn her of his arrival, his wife told him in a tired but happy voice, Tony, congratulations. You're a real daddy now. Only we didn't have a son, but 2 wonderful girls. Do you want to talk to them? Tony listened to the kitten-like mewing sounds, and his heart jumped with happiness. He remembered for the rest of his life this day when he first heard the voices of his newborn daughters. Nothing could compare to the happiness he experienced then. He said to himself, That's it, Tony. Now you are a model father and family man, which means that you will have to forget about partying, stag parties, and other entertainment. For the sake of family happiness, he sacrificed a lot, but the game was worth the candle. So thought the successful programmer and happy father. After returning from the internship, he taught at his university for some time, but Sophia's appetite was increasing every day. He had to change his field of activity. In the company headed by Mr. Barry, Tony was paid twice as much as the university, and he was able to fulfill the main dream of his beloved woman. Bought her a car, very similar to a ladybug. Tony was so loaded with work that he didn't even have time to eat in peace, let alone just keep up with his wife for that matter. He hadn't even inquired about how or where Sophia had gotten her driver's license. The young woman waved a plastic card with her picture on it in front of her husband's nose. I am now a full-fledged road user. Dear husband, how do you see that I will slowly master your gift? Very positive. Just be careful. I'll do my best. I don't understand why you have to warn a man of danger in advance, Sophia asked it with undisguised sneer. Tony laughed. But it's natural. Such warnings are also a form of expressing concern. I'm worried about you, so I try to protect you from unpleasant accidents. Tony tried very hard, but it was impossible to avoid trouble. The usual Sophia was out in the evening for a warm-up, as she herself dubbed her short trips to gain driving experience. That September evening, she fed the twins porridge and cheerfully said to her husband, That's it. Tony, I'm turning in your shift. The girls are fed and watered. Your job is to keep them entertained until I return. As time went on, Sophia never came back. His daughter got tired of playing, became cranky. He had to put them to bed himself. The clock showed 10 p.m. Then he was worried about where she disappeared. She left at 6, and now it was 10 o'clock. He started dialing his wife's number, but in response he heard the mechanical voice of the answering machine. Call back later. It wasn't until an hour later that he sounded the alarm. Tony frantically dialed the numbers of acquaintances and friends, but no one knew where Sophia was. At 4 a.m. he got a call, and an unfamiliar voice asked, Who is Sophia, Tony? His heart dropped somewhere down, and Tony muttered quietly, This is my wife. Tell me what's wrong with her. Unfortunately, I must inform you that your spouse has had an accident. She's in intensive care. You'll have to come to the city hospital. Tony looked into the bedroom to make sure his daughters were sound asleep. He rushed to the hospital hoping the worst had not happened, but the doctor met him in the lobby. We did everything we could, but the woman was seriously injured and lost a lot of blood. She died on the operating table. It was a terrible blow. Tony, right there in the lobby, howled like a wolf. In those terrible moments, it seemed to him that the world shattered into molecules and atoms, and only he remained unharmed, alone with his grief. Apparently, the surgeon was frightened by this unusual reaction for a man and called for a nurse. Meryl, give this man a sedative injection, or we'll have to pump him out. The girl did as the doctor instructed, and Tony calmed down. Inside, he felt no more pain or other unpleasant sensations. Dawn glimmered behind the horizon line. Tony reached for the pack, but it was empty. Wow, he'd smoke all his cigarettes in one sitting. I'm gonna go try to sleep. But as soon as he closed his eyes, Sophia's image appeared. She was trying to say something, but her voice couldn't penetrate the invisible transparent wall. Tony tried to guess from her lips what she was saying, but he could only make out 3 words. Find that woman. The sleepless night had taken its toll on Tony's condition. He drank 3 cups of strong coffee, but his head was still foggy and every turn made him nauseous. I need something to drink or I won't make it to work. The man rummaged through the medicine cabinet and struggled to find a pill. He managed to swallow the medicine only on the 3rd try, and he wondered how people could swallow such pills every day. To speed up packing, he decided to make the simplest dish for breakfast, an omelet. In the meantime, Tony looked into the nursery. Girls, wake up. Remember, we can't be late or evil Uncle Joe will close the gate in our face. The sisters jumped out from under the blankets and immediately pelted their father with questions. Daddy, when are we going to the theater for a fairy tale? And to Grandpa, we will really go in the summer. Tony answered the questions of his daughters and the mood slowly but steadily rose up. Suddenly Lucy asked, Daddy, is that auntie really our mom or is she lying? He was silent because he didn't know what to say. As always, Brittany came to the rescue. Lucy, you don't need that lady. Our mom's dead and we don't need anyone. Got it, Lucy mumbled, not to revisit this unpleasant topic. Tony entertained the children all the way to the kindergarten by pretending to be different animals. Lucy and Brittany laughed heartily, unable to calm down, even when they arrived at the place. Uncle Joe was waiting for the latecomers in full readiness. He looked suspiciously at the new arrivals, only to sigh heavily. Tony gave the girls a cheer. It looks like we're not late today. Come on, run to your group. I'll meet you at work tonight. He was a little distracted from bad thoughts, but just before lunch, he decided to call his father. Father, I have an urgent matter to discuss with you. Tommy was surprised at his son's call. 1 minute I can't reach you, the next you show up. What's going on with you? It's not a phone call. Then come to my place. I think it's better for you to come here. It must be something serious for you to think of me. Well, I can't promise I'll come today, but I'll come tomorrow. I'll ask Lee to look after my place. Tommy showed up the next evening. Tony hadn't come home yet, so the older Tommy had to wait on the landing for a while. It went without saying that Margot could not remain idle. She first opened the door a little ajar and asked sternly, Man, who do you want? Tommy was amused by the way 2 moving eyes watched him. He clicked his heels together. Allow me to introduce myself as retired Colonel Tommy. Why yell at the whole entryway? The door chain rattled and the door opened fully. Margot looked at Tommy without embarrassment. So you are Tony's father, the valiant detective. You're exaggerating about valor, but other than that, you're right. My son called me in on an emergency, so I rushed over. And here I am waiting. Margot has perked up. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Come in. He probably went to the garden to pick up the girls. The woman let the guest in and carefully closed the door. You must be tired from the road. Let me give you some healing tea. Tommy was amazed at the woman's hospitality. You know, I could use a cup of strong tea. Margot ran to the kitchen and returned with a small tray. Help yourself, please. The man accepted the cup from the hostess's hands and took a sip with pleasure. Oh, yes, you really have a magic drink. I drank such tea when I served in the Far East. Tony told me about you. You don't remember me? We moved in at almost the same time. My parents got this apartment on a first-come, first-served basis. Tommy decided to tell a little lie. Sure, I remember you were a young girl. But I must say, you haven't changed a bit. The compliment brought out the sweetest feelings in a woman's soul. You were handsome at that time too, and you're still a real colonel. And your son is very good, always polite. It's just a pity he's alone. Margot wanted to add something else, but children's voices came from the staircase landing. I think you've arrived. Tommy hurried out the door. Thank you again for the tea. If you don't mind, we can meet again, talk. Margot didn't mind continuing to get to know each other. When the colonel carefully closed the door behind him, she critically examined her reflection in the mirror. I'm still good, and I can do it. You can't miss a man like that. If the neighbor was overflowing with delight, Tony was in a depressed mood. He sent the girls straight to the nursery, even though they resisted. "You'll have a chance to talk to Grandpa. We need to have a little privacy." The men retired to the kitchen, and the son briefly told his father about the strange woman whose appearance had thrown him off his guard. "Dad, you're an expert in these matters. Help me to understand. I've got a lot of thoughts in my head. I'm afraid to say them out loud." "Don't burden yourself. We'll figure it out." "Are you sure we're going to be able to unravel this tangle?" "That's insulting, son. When Colonel Tommy gets on the case, all the secrets are bound to come out. But tell me honestly, do you really want to find this woman?" "I didn't at first, but now I do." "Maybe you shouldn't break it. Think about it. Tony spent that night without sleep too, only he didn't smoke anymore. He just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about his father's words. In the morning he fell into a meaningless nightmare and woke up with a headache. Tommy was already in the kitchen. I thought I'd take over the place. I brought some home-cooked food with me. He was slicing cheese, arranging it nicely on a plate. Tony couldn't hide his surprise. "Daddy, you're like a real restaurateur. You'll spoil us. You're pale. You can't work so hard. You can't do it any other way. I have 2 princesses growing up. You should get married." "Father, here we go again. Let's not talk about that. Why don't you tell me where we should start looking for this woman?" "You don't have to look for her. First, we need to find out if there were any irregularities in the medical staff. The maternity hospital where your wife gave birth is the easiest place to pull a lead. Father, I have complete confidence in your expertise." "Okay, we gotta go. The daycare center has a very strict policy about leaving late arrivals outside. Luckily, my workplace is more lenient towards troublemakers." Tony finished his coffee as he walked and took a few slices of cheese with him. "I'll buy Sam a drink. I wonder what your roommate was entertaining you with last night." "We just talked to her about life. She's a very interesting woman." When the son and granddaughters friendly left the apartment, Tommy pulled out of his jacket pocket his old notebook. "Where I have Bobby's number here." Although many years had passed, the phone number of a fellow employee had not changed. Bobby was indeed already in the rank of colonel and headed one of the district departments of the regional center. He was very happy to recognize the voice of his former boss. "Tommy, you can count on me. I'll help you in any way I can." Senior Tommy soon had breakfast and went to an important meeting. He forgot for a while not only his overripe age, but even his favorite farm. That's what happens to real detectives once they take the criminal's trail. Abby was desperate. She had already regretted her action 100 times, but as a loving mother, she couldn't do otherwise. She ran home with Tony in front of her eyes. Now she knew what fury really looked like. It looked like the face of the man who had kicked her out the door in shame. She tried to calm herself down. The inner voice was saying angrily, "What did you want? Cuckoo, you thought your sin was forgiven when you took on the care of a sick child. No, honey, the hardest part is ahead of you." Abby opened the apartment door carefully. "Liam, Mom's here. I'll feed you now, and then we'll read you stories." She went into a small room where a skinny boy was playing with cars on the floor. "Mommy, I listened to Aunt Abigail while you were away. Aunt Abigail is nice, but it's still better with you. Please don't go away again." She squatted down next to her son. "I'll try not to leave you again. It's just that I had to meet someone who could help you." The boy's eyes lit up with joy. "He's a doctor. Someone you know." "No, not a doctor, but he's very kind." Abby kissed her son and thought how much he looked like his father. She cooked a modest dinner in the small kitchen and cried. The unhappy woman could not understand how this could have happened to her exactly. "But why did I give in to the entreaties of that painted doll? Why did I not listen to my heart? Nothing can be changed now. One of us has already paid for her sin. Now it's my turn." Abby had only recently learned of Sophia's tragic death. It was that event that triggered her to try to make a change. More than anything, she wanted to see her girls, but with great difficulty she managed to find out where the family lived. Bobby stood up not only as a colonel in rank, but in appearance as well. Tommy regarded him with amazement. "Wow, you go to the gym?" Bobby laughed. "I do, Tommy." "Sure I do. It's not much use though. As soon as they get a title, they put on 5 kills and I can't do anything about it. You sit down, I'll make some tea." Tommy sat down and looked around. The office, of course, was not his, but in fact nothing had changed since he worked, except that the laptop on the desk appeared, and the office had not been repaired for 10 years or even more. Bobby sat down in front of him and looked closely at his former mentor. I realize you came here for a reason. I've heard that you're in the village now, that you even keep a farm. Bobby, why don't you get your act together and come down here sometime? I'll introduce you to my farm and I'll heat the sauna. Bobby rubbed his hands together. That there's a bathhouse. You can't go anywhere in the country without a bathhouse. It's not just a bath, it's also a place to get rid of body fatigue and various ailments. Bobby rolled his eyes dreamily. Why, I'll just come and visit. I'm a free man now. My wife found someone who earns more money and lods at home nights. Well, I'm not offended. I even understand her. Tommy shook his head. You're young, now you're married, now you're divorced. I need your help, Bobby. And preferably unofficial. Bobby became serious at once. Something happened with your son. No, my son is quiet and doesn't get into any trouble, if that's what you mean. But he does need help, and I need help too, of course. They talked for over an hour. At the beginning of the conversation, Bobby invited a young employee dressed in civilian clothes into his office. He took careful notes, sometimes raising his hand to clarify something. Saying goodbye, Bobby said, Anthony, I have the best employee, although he gives the impression of a very quiet and withdrawn, can talk to anyone. Such an actor has such a charm. Attentive, of course, notices the slightest flaws. In general, we know the maternity hospital. I think that in a couple of days there will be some information. So as soon as there's something, I'll call you right away. Tommy gave in to a sudden impulse and went into the flower store. He looked at the flowers for a long time and finally saw what he needed. He bought a bunch of large daisies. He went not home to his son, anyway. There was no one there now, but to his neighbor Margot opened the door at once, and seeing the bouquet in the colonel's hands when he went to Maiden Lane, she blushed. Oh, come in, Tommy. I'll put the kettle on. Tony jumped out of work, looked at his watch, cursed. He was already late. He should have told his father to pick up the girls, because not only were they late in the morning, but the girls were waiting for him in the evening. He knew right away something was up. Brittany, Lucy, what's with the mood? What happened? Brittany just blurted it out. Nothing, Daddy. Lucy turned away, displeased. Tony stopped, turning the girls toward him. You know you have to tell Daddy, or one of the adults, about anything weird. Lucy couldn't take it anymore. Daddy, we saw that aunt again today. When we went for a walk, she was standing behind the fence. Tony went cold. So this is getting dangerous. We should definitely talk to this person. But what to do with the girls, how he would let them go to the garden or to the yard while they got home, he thought over a lot of options, but except for taking off work again, nothing came to mind. The entryway smelled deliciously of baked goods, and Tony swallowed unhappily. He'd forgotten to eat lunch today, for which he was immediately told off by a coworker. They opened the door and froze. The smell was coming from their apartment. Lucy jumped up. It's Grandpa. But it turned out to be more than just Grandpa. Along with Tommy in the kitchen was Margot. Tony sat up, even opened his mouth. How much the woman in their kitchen didn't look like a protruding neighbor. Hello, his father, who was just sealing the filling into the dough, turned around immediately. Oh, Tony, and we have a masterclass on pies. Go wash. Now we will try. Dinner went well. Father made Margot laugh with jokes. Margot laughed merrily, and Tony watched the whole thing in amazement. It suddenly occurred to him that Margot would fit in perfectly in her father's country home. When everyone had gone, Tony and Tommy locked themselves in the kitchen. Dad, I'm getting scared. This woman was watching the girls at the daycare center today. I mean, she found them there too. Tommy frowned. Bobby told me that information won't be in for a couple days. What do you think? I think we should take off work, not take the girls to the daycare for the time being, and maybe the police will officially report her and they'll find her quickly. Tommy asked Tony restlessly. I don't know something. Tony looked out the window. He himself would prefer not to remember anything, but that very night, when he was up and smoking, sitting by the window, one detail came to mind. You see, Dad, I remembered something. I don't know if I need this memory or not. When Sophia was 5 or 6 months pregnant, I somehow found her chart. Just sat down to read some tests or something. I didn't really understand it, but it didn't seem to be a big deal, but it said the size of one fetus. A fetus. You see, Dad, that detail slipped my mind, and that's when I remembered it. Tommy looked at his son carefully. But let's be logical. First of all, after all, technicians have a tendency to make mistakes. Even if it happens rarely, but it happens. Because it's true. Tony nodded, afraid of the moment when his father will say, Second. If everything was right, the girls really are twins. And let's say the woman is right about something. Then there is another baby somewhere. Tony looked at his dad with crazy eyes. Dad, Brittany and Lucy, my daughters. That's out of the question. Tommy threw his hands up in the air. Did I say anything different? And I'd cut the throat of anyone who said otherwise. But you have to admit, there is a baby. If the maternity ward finds out, we're gonna have to find him. You realize that. And it's likely that it's the woman we're most anxious to think is crazy who will be able to tell us where the baby is and what's wrong with it. Tony jumped up. Dad, I don't want to understand it. I don't want to accept it. Why cannot leave everything as it is? But he knew perfectly well that everything will not be left as it is. For 2 days, the girls were at home with their grandfather, and then their father said, "That's what I decided to show Margot. Besides, Lee has her own work to do. I can't take advantage of her kindness for that long. I suggest you take the girls for yourself. If you're afraid I can't handle me, Margot will. Margot and Lee are always there for me." Lucy and Brittany fell silent. They looked at Daddy with a kind of mute question, with great hope, and Tony looked at them. I guess it really was for the best. It would be easier to spot a stranger in the village, and the girls would be safer there. At last Lucy couldn't stand it any longer. "Daddy, we're going to obey Grandpa. We're bored here." Brittany immediately supported her sister. "You won't even let us go to daycare." Tony gave up. What else could he do? But the fact that Margot was going with them was of course decisive. He saw his family off in the morning and rushed off to work. At least he thought to call his boss and warn him that he was going to be late, or he would have gotten a reprimand at work again. Time passed quickly, and Tony went home with only one thought: to fall asleep. Somehow he was very tired during this time. The house was unaccustomedly quiet. He even walked through the rooms and thought that it was the first time he was without girls. He called his father, found out they were okay. He relaxed a little, didn't eat dinner, decided to go to bed right away. I was about to leave the kitchen, but I threw a fleeting glance out the window and immediately refreshed myself. I didn't want to sleep anymore. In a word, not at all. It was raining outside, and under the rain he saw a familiar figure. Tony didn't hesitate a second. He grabbed his jacket from the coat rack and rushed down the stairs. When he jumped out into the yard, the woman was gone. Tony looked around in confusion and saw her disappear around the corner of the house. He rushed over, saw her turn, and followed, trying to keep his head down. He didn't understand why he was hiding, why he didn't go up to her and ask her all those questions that tormented him so much. The woman turned toward the old 2-story buildings and then, passing them, came to the path that led to the barracks. If Tony wasn't mistaken, they should have been torn down 100 years ago, but people lived there still. The woman entered the barracks and Tony soon saw her appear at one of the windows. She leaned in as if she were talking to a child, and his heart pricked in a bad way. Twilight was descending on the street. He stood for a moment, then moved determinedly toward the door behind which the one who had brought such turmoil to his family a moment ago had disappeared. Abby had just had time to hug Liam when someone knocked on the door. She went to open it. It must be Abigail's neighbor who had been babysitting Liam while she was away, who had forgotten something. The woman opened the door and exhaled in surprise. "You. I can come in." Abby stared at Tony's angry face for a moment, then nodded briefly. "Yes, come in. We have to talk sooner or later." Tony walked through, stopping, not sure where he should go. Abby slipped past him and pointed with her hand toward the room. "This way, please." He took a step to follow her and almost fell over. There was a boy sitting on the couch in the room. That the boy was sitting there wasn't very surprising. The fact that he was an exact replica of a picture of Tony himself as a child hit Tony not faintly. Abby watched in silence as Tony coped with himself. Then she spoke softly. "Meet Lime." Tony took a foggy step toward the boy. By now he could see both that the boy was too thin and that there was a pile of medication on the table by the couch. The man held out his hand. "Tony." The boy smiled weakly, shook his hand. "Liam." Tony, it was like an electric shock. At that moment, his phone rang. Dan, what bad timing. He pulled the receiver out. Dad popped up on the screen. Of course, he couldn't help but pick up the phone when the father had his daughters on the line. "Yeah, Dad." Tony called me Bobby, and he already knew he wasn't going to hear anything good. Or rather, he would hear something that would completely turn their lives around. He found a nurse who was working at the time. Anyway, Sophia. She gave birth to a baby boy. The baby had a heart condition, and your wife apparently didn't want to deal with a sick baby. Maybe she had some other reason, I don't know. Anyway, there was a girl in labor with her. I can't tell you how it went down, but the two of them, they switched babies. Sophia took the girls, but that girl, your son's girlfriend, the nurse, said the boy was doomed. Tony didn't say a word. Son, why don't you say something? We need to find that woman. I did. Dad, I'm at her house right now. I'll call you back. Tony disconnected, shoved his phone in his pocket. Abby was administering Liam's medication. The boy lay down, dozing off almost immediately. Abby walked silently past Tony, and he motioned for her to follow. In the kitchen, they sat at the table across from each other. She was silent, and Tony didn't know where to begin. Abby spoke up on her own. My biggest dream was to get out of the house. My mother worked 2 jobs. My father drank away the money, chased her and me around. I couldn't understand why we lived with him. He didn't work. If we left him, we'd have a much better life together. I often asked my mom that. She always said, "Why are you so angry, my daughter? You know that if we leave Daddy, he'll be gone very soon." I understood that, but I didn't understand one thing. Why suffer for a man who's drowning himself? I was determined that as soon as I finished school, I'd go to the city. I thought everything was so wonderful here. Abby grinned sadly, looked at Tony. I don't want you to think I'm trying to make you feel bad or justify myself in any way. No, I just want you to understand my motives. The town didn't welcome me. I failed my exams at 2 colleges because I didn't prepare for them at all. So I took a job as a waitress in a cafe. It was probably the best time of my life. In addition to being fed and paid a salary, we were allowed to take half of the tips. I even sent some to my mother. That's where I met you. I won't dwell on him. I'll just say this. He was rich, he rained money to the left, and I've never seen such a thing in my life. In our village, every cent is reverently treated, and he used to tip more than my mother earned in a month. He paid attention to me, and I'd, like a fool, decided that now I will live as I saw in the series. I was sure we'd get married, and everything would be fine. When I found out I was pregnant, I couldn't tell him for a long time. I just wanted to present it in a special way so that he would remember this moment. But it was memorable for me. I told him at the restaurant when he came in with some friends. He laughed me off, told me he didn't want kids with someone like me, and then asked the owner to fire me. All through the pregnancy, I was interrupted in random earnings, and when it was time to give birth, I clearly realized I wasn't going to be able to get the kids out. I already knew I was going to have twins. It was depressing me. I cried all the time. I realized that for their own good, I would have to give them up. A very beautiful and well-to-do young woman was giving birth with me. I heard the doctor saying that the labor was hard and the baby was weak. She was not crying, and I was very worried about her. It's amazing how a person holds a blow, all in herself. And then we got to talking. I told her that I had no new option but to give up the girls. Sophia immediately, without a second thought, proposed her plan. She said that she and her husband would be able to give the girls everything I could not dream of, and she suggested I take her son. She said he was no good anyway. I was silent in shock, and Sophia added that she didn't want to go another 9 months looking like an elephant, and if the baby died, her husband would still want another child. I thought it was the height of cynicism, but Sophia said that this is life, and if I think about what a beautiful life awaits my girls, I will treat everything differently. And then she offered me money, lots of money. Said it was to thank her son for not being alone until then. You know, I thought about it for a long time, like 2 hours, and I said yes. Yes, it all sounded and looked very cynical, but Sophia was right, it was better for everyone. It was very hard to convince the nurse. There were a lot of women in labor that day, and we were all sure that no one would notice anything, especially since there were no rounds yet. Sophia offered her money, and her resistance was broken. I bought the apartment outright. As you can imagine, it cost a dime. The owners were thrilled to be rid of her. They even left us some of the furniture that we still use today. I don't know exactly how Liam felt at the time. I just kept thinking about the girls. And then Liam got sick. We were taken to the hospital, and I realized I just couldn't let that boy leave the world. I've beaten down offices. I've asked for help from everyone I could. I scrubbed the entryways of all the nearby houses just to keep us alive. We survived the crisis, but in order for Liam to live like all the other kids, we need surgery. We can't do it here. We have to go to a neighboring state. I managed to raise a small amount of money, but it's not enough. That's the only reason I started looking for you. I realize you can take my Liam away from me, and you certainly won't give me my girls. But I'd do anything to get you to help him." Tony raised his head, looked at Abby. "That's how you need the money. Somehow I think you're a common con artist." Abby looked at him carefully. Tony was ready to kill himself for saying that. What's he saying? He could see that this boy looked just like him. "Yeah, I need the money to save Liam." She said it calmly, and Tony suddenly realized how hard it was for her to say it. "And anyway, this whole conversation is something I have to think about." He stood, then turned to her. "Can I take if you have any papers related to Liam's illness?" Abby nodded, pulled out a weighted package from somewhere, handed it to him. "We'd only have 2 months. If we don't, Liam will be past that age for this kind of surgery. We'll have to put everything back together again. Only we don't have that much time." Tony stormed out of the apartment, raced home. His head was empty, completely empty. He didn't even bother to look in the bag, because he understood everything Abby had told him true enough. Tony fell asleep right in his clothes. All night, he dreamed of Sophia with Liam in her arms, crying and begging for forgiveness. In the morning, he went straight to the supervisor's office. Barry raised his eyebrows in surprise. "My God, Tony himself, and without being late, what's wrong?" He started the conversation in a humorous manner, but immediately faltered when he saw Tony's condition. "Something did happen. I hope your girls are all right." "Yeah, I need to talk to you." Tony closed the door firmly behind him. He was holding a packet of Liam's medical records. It took him 2 hours to get out of the warden's office. It took Barry 20 minutes to find anyone who could help Tony in this situation. As the man reached for the doorknob, the supervisor asked, "What are you going to do with this, Abby? Just take the kid away, or do you want to punish her?" Tony shook his head. "I haven't thought about that yet. Right now, the most important thing is to save Liam." Abby opened the doors, looked at Tony without surprise, and stepped back. "May I?" "Sure, Tony." Tony walked into the room, placed a big beautiful car and a picture book in front of Liam. So, Liam was ready for his trip. The boy looked at him with all his eyes. "So Mom was telling the truth. You're going to save me?" "Of course I will. I wouldn't have it any other way." He heard Abby crying behind him. "Thank you." He wanted to shout, "Why thank you? That's my son. I'm saving my son." But Tony refrained, perhaps only because he was afraid of scaring the child. 2 months later, Tony and Liam returned. While Liam needed care, it was decided at a family council that the boy, and with him Abby only as a babysitter, would live with them. Tommy, before leaving for his village, called Tony away. "Son, I'm not a soft man, you know, but things in life are a bit different from what we want, what we think is right. Abby and Sophia, they've both done terrible things, but put yourself in Abby's shoes. Not this Abby, although this one too, but the one when she gave birth to the twins alone." Tony would have liked to explain that such things can't be explained, let alone justified, but his father had no time. Margot was waiting for him in the village. She suspiciously often visited her father, staying for a week or two. Abby tried to stay out of Tony's sight. He still worked evenings, socializing with his son and daughters. Tony couldn't think of the right solution, the right way out of the situation. If he started proceedings, Abby could go to jail and the girls. He wasn't good at these things, so he just counted down the days. Strangely, the girls suddenly looked better. They had some elaborate but beautiful hairstyles all the time. They seemed to be wearing the same clothes as before. It all looked so much prettier somehow. He could see that Abby had changed too. The anxiety from her eyes hadn't gone anywhere. It was especially noticeable when Abby looked at him, but it was as if she had opened up. Tony was surprised to realize that Abby was young and beautiful. One weekend when Tony had planned to get a good night's sleep, the phone rang. He grudgingly fumbled for the phone, and when he saw the time was 6 a.m. and it said Dad, he grabbed the receiver. "Dad, what's wrong? What makes you think something's wrong?" "Well, you've seen the time. Happy people don't watch the clock." Tommy chuckled stupidly. "Dad, are you all right?" "More than okay." "All right, wake up your big family, load them into the car, and get everybody to my place." "But." "No buts. We're having the big celebration tonight, so hurry up. I hope you realize that Abby needs to come too, and the girls really need some fresh air." Dad passed out and Tony didn't even get a chance to ask what was going on. He agonizingly remembered all the dates, but none of them fit. The colonel's orders were not to be discussed. All rise. The rooms began to stir. Abby came out to see him. Something's wrong. I don't know. I suppose so, but maybe not. My father called and ordered everyone to be in the village as soon as possible because they're celebrating some important event. I wish I knew what it was. Abby smiled, and Tony suddenly noticed how much her smile transformed her face. She became at once so young, so tender. Daddy can't be upset. He's a good man you have. Tony looked at her in surprise. She had only seen him a few times, and all the time he only gave orders. An hour later, they were on their way. Lime was flushed. While they were packing, he kept asking the girls, "Do goats bite? Are rabbits pretty?" Tommy realized that the boy had never been to the village. Probably Abby hadn't taken him to hers. When they were already moving, Tony asked softly, "Abby, what about your parents?" She gave him a quick glance. "They're gone. Lime was only 3 years old when there was a fire in our house. Everyone thinks it was his father who got drunk and fell asleep with a cigarette. I'm sorry. It's okay." The rest of the way they listened to the girls excitedly tell Lion what adventures awaited him. The wicket gate and the doors too were wide open. Tony honestly didn't understand anything at all. He ran quickly up the steps. Margot, in a beautiful dress, was setting the table. She was assisted by the equally dressed Lee. Father and his ex-servants Barry were talking about something on the sofa. "Oh, the son is here. Welcome. Dad, can you explain what's going on?" Father stood up, waited until everyone had entered the house and hugged the confused Margot. "And we decided that happiness should not know the age, and decided, so to speak, to legalize our relationship." Tony collapsed on the sofa. That's what a father can surprise. Brittany and Lucy were already hanging on to Grandpa, and then Liam couldn't stand it any longer. He came over and immediately fell into his arms. Tony shifted his gaze to Abby. She was smiling again for the second time that day. I wonder if she hadn't smiled before, or if he just hadn't seen it. The celebration had turned out to be a lot of fun. They must have all missed the usual fun. Tommy watched with a smile as Barry and Lee danced the slow dance. It looked like Lee had finally found her happiness. When the music died down, a slightly tipsy Barry made a fiery speech that as soon as in 6 months, he would take a well-deserved vacation. He would immediately move to live here, and having Lee asked, "You won't chase me away?" When everyone had settled down, Tony went out on the porch for a smoke. No, Tony went back to his cigarette. His father sat down next to him. "You smoking again?" "I'm just putting out the light." Dad sighed. "What are you waiting for, Tony? What do you think girls need a mother? You don't want to be around the female sex." "Dad, who wants someone as happy as me? Don't forget, I've got 3 kids now. You really don't understand who needs me?" Tony looked at his father in surprise, and he sighed as if he was talking to a madman. "Only a fool wouldn't notice the way Abby looks at you. I understand that, but you should look at her, Tony. She's a good girl, and she's not a stranger." And Tony sat there for a long time wondering how his father could have thought of such a thing. Abby looked at Tony fearfully, and he spun around like a madman. "Tony, what are you so happy about? Do you have any idea what 4 kids are like?" "Of course, we have triplets. That's like 1 kid." Abby sighed sorrowfully. Tony gave her a sly look. "Don't you want to have a baby with me, wife?" "I do before." Abby had gotten her calculations a little wrong because the conversation was very early in the pregnancy. After she was discharged from the hospital, they had 2 more kids, just like her grandfather. He, by the way, saw this resemblance at once and said that he would bring up these boys himself.
An ordinary working day in the same place and team did not foreshadow anything unusual. Having taken his workplace, Tony turned on the computer and began to work, as usual catching Veronica's glances, which she threw at him furtively. The whole office knew that Veronica was in love with him, and Tony even found it annoying. Colleagues often teased him, and it was unpleasant for him. Tony, of course, joked about it, but in his heart, that's what struck him. He is a free man, prominent, quite well-to-do. Not so long ago bought an apartment, albeit on the outskirts of the city, but a 2-bedroom. And Veronica, not his type at all. You could walk past her on the street and not notice her. He didn't like fat women at all, and even with the baggage of a 4-year-old daughter. One should choose according to oneself and not go for something that costs an order of magnitude more, he thought. Nanny, the economist from the neighboring office, was the perfect match for Veronica. A bald, chubby guy with a pot belly and glasses. But even he doesn't pay attention to Veronica. Probably doesn't pick him out for himself either. There'd be fewer lonely people if everyone chose their soulmate of the same level. You going to lunch? Tony heard Harvey's voice working at the table next to him and looked at his watch. It was already lunchtime too. He stretched and rose from his chair. Let's go. They walked out of the office and rushed toward the elevator as suddenly. Tony even blinked a few times, thinking he was imagining it, but no, it was real. A girl he'd never seen before was walking towards them, but if he had, he wouldn't have been able to forget her. She looked like she had stepped off the cover of a glossy magazine. Her blonde, wavy hair fell over her naked, graceful shoulders, and the figure that was encased in the pink dress, the slim waist, the wide hips, the breasts. Tony thought she was between a size 2 and 3. Beautiful face, perfect makeup, manicure, that dress, thin stiletto sandals. Everything about her was perfect. Tony admired the girl, unable to take his eyes off her. In fact, he wasn't the only one. Other men present here, also as mesmerized, looked at this goddess. But the goddess, not noticing anyone, continued her way. She passed Tony and Harvey without even looking at them, and they turned around. "What a doll," said Harvey in a whisper, almost drooling. "What an ass." Tony also noticed her rounded ass, which was tightened by the dress. "Perfect. Not on weekends either. Tony, the places I like to go are not likely to be to your liking," she said in a somewhat condescending tone. I'm sure she would. "Let's go anywhere you like." Well, Marian smiled a little, and her eyes sparkled slyly. "Then on Saturday at the restaurant Turandot. Do you know it?" "No, but I'd love to go there with you." Tony was so happy he could fly to the moon and leave a phone number. Marian took a pen out of her purse and wrote her phone number on a napkin. "Thank you," replied Tony, putting the napkin in his pocket. He was in a great mood the rest of the day, looking forward to their meeting on Saturday. He bragged to Harvey about his little victory. "You better look at the price tag at that resto before you get excited," he replied. "You can't spare any money on a girl like that." Tony answered, but typed in the name of the restaurant in the search engine. Immediately going to the menu section, he whistled a little. "Yeah, that's what I told you," said Harvey. "Hey, 10 grand a plate. Fucking awesome." Tony scratched the back of his head thoughtfully. "I told you this girl ain't for the likes of us. You want a pretty girl like that, you got to spend some money. I don't believe she has no one. There's no way she doesn't have a man. It's up to you. If you got a little extra money, take her out to a restaurant. I doubt very much you'll be going to a room afterwards." Well, maybe not so fast, but it's still Sunday. Tony wasn't thrilled with the prices at the Turandot, but he wanted Marian so much that he was willing to splurge. "Will there be anything left to go out for on Sunday?" "I'll figure it out," he answered. The next day, when Tony came to have lunch in a cafe located on the first floor of the business center, he was surprised to stare at the table where Marian sat in the company. Actually, it was the company of the girl caused him such bewilderment. Next to the object of his dreams sat Veronica. What could be the society of a queen with a washerwoman? That was the association he had in mind at that moment. "Do you see that?" he asked Harvey. "See what?" He didn't understand. "What's what?" "Marian is having lunch without Veronica." "So what?" "Who knows who's having lunch with whom?" he replied. Tony said nothing and went to the table where the most beautiful woman in the world was having lunch. "Good afternoon, Marian. Do you mind if my friend and I join you?" he asked. Marian strained her memory, but she couldn't remember the man's name. "Veronica and I would like to talk alone. I'm sorry," she replied, rewarding him with a discreet smile. "But Saturday is still on, I hope?" he asked, a little disappointed. "If you haven't changed your mind, yes," she said. Of course I hadn't changed my mind. Tony walked back to Nikolai. "Of course you have. I'm dreaming about this Saturday," he thought. Her eyes, the most beautiful eyes he'd ever seen. They were mesmerizing, maddening. He was drowning in them, having looked into them only a moment ago. "What's up? Did you blow him off?" Harvey asked him. "They need to talk to Veronica." "About what?" That's what Marianne can talk to Veronica about, he said in surprise, looking at the table he just stepped away from. I'd ask, Harvey replied. How do you envision it? I don't know. What difference does it make? Taking trays of food, Tony and Nikolai sat down at a vacant table. I'll ask Verka after lunch, said Tony. You should be doing this. You'll never get anywhere with that, Marianne, said Harvey. Tony frowned and looked at his colleague. Yes, I'll lay down my life, but she will be mine, Tony replied somewhat irritably. After all, he was not a beggar, and he was not lacking in looks, but Harvey was getting annoyed. He must be jealous, because he was probably drooling over Marianne too. But he wouldn't go for it, because with his beer belly it would be ridiculous to approach such a girl. Tony came back from lunch and immediately approached Veronica. Veronica, do you know Marianne? He asked, sitting down on the edge of her table. Yep, she answered, continuing to stare at the monitor. She had been in love with Tony for a long time and she knew it was not reciprocated, but it was still very unpleasant to see him drooling over Marianne. Veronica realized that she was not beautiful and to Marianne she was like to the moon, but do not love only for appearance. And from where? Asked Tony. In the same school studied, she answered. Well, how small the world is. Listen, Veronica, does she have a man now? Veronica looked at Tony with undisguised surprise. I'm not in the habit of asking people about their personal lives. I understand, but it's important to me, and I have a huge favor to ask of you. One of these days, you could ask Marianne if she likes me. Not for nothing, of course. I owe you a treat. Tony, I'm not going to do that, Veronica said a little harshly. Please, he looked at her with a look of pleading. Tony, lunch is over. Go to your workplace. I will. Verochka, please help me. It's a matter of life and death. All right, I will, but just go away. You're the best, joyfully replied Tony and went to his desk, and Veronica continued to work. And on Thursday and Friday, Veronica watched how Tony's eyes light up when he sees Marianne. And no man had ever looked at her like that. That's what it means to be beautiful, she thought, sighing sadly. A man like Tony would never pay attention to a gray mouse like her. The long-awaited Saturday came, and Tony was looking forward to the evening to finally meet in an informal setting with the girl of his dreams, thinking at the same time how to continue this evening and at the same time, and the night at his house. This girl had been on his mind ever since he'd seen her, and he'd never wanted anything in his life more than he wanted her. No, besides, we're almost there, and I really hope you change your mind. I'm not in the habit of sleeping with men for food. It's not like that. Here we are. Tony parked the car in the parking lot of the restaurant. He got out first and opened the door on the side where Marianne was sitting, offering her his hand. Tony didn't particularly like the royal style. He was more of a fan of high-tech style rather than flashy pomp. The excess of gold around cut the eye, but for Marianne's sake, he was ready to go anywhere, as long as she liked it. They sat down at a table, and Tony thought only about how to make her go to his house after the restaurant. His imagination was painting pictures of their stormy night, so he was filled with an excitement that couldn't be damped. Tony opened the menu and hoped that Marianne would not order the most expensive dishes. He himself did not want to order anything at all, but he realized that he had to, otherwise she would understand the reason, especially there were dishes at quite humane prices. So choosing 2 dishes with a total cost of just over $2,000, he hoped that Marianne will make a choice in the same price category. Have you made up your mind? He asked, not stopping to devour with his eyes her breasts, slightly protruding from the neckline. Yes, she replied, closing the menu. The waiter came up to them. I would like black cod, eggplant with foie gras and truffles, Thai rice with shrimp, vanilla mango cream and blackberries, and from the drinks, a martini royale. Tony swallowed nervously, estimating that it was 10,000 if not more. Modesty Marianne is not distinguished by modesty, or it is on purpose so. But never mind, this girl is worth it. He immediately thought and voiced his modest choice. Do you come here often? He asked as the waiter left to take their order. I go to different places every weekend. This restaurant is one of my favorites, she replied. How else do you like to spend your time? Very different. What about you? I don't have anyone to hang out with, so I don't go out much. What are your plans for tomorrow? I don't know yet. What do you want to propose? I want to suggest that we meet again, because otherwise I'll suffer all day without you, he said. I'll think about it, indulgently replied Marion. Tony did not like this answer, but he only smiled, continuing to admire her. After all, he still will not rest until this girl will not be his, and he is accustomed to achieve what he wants. So this time he is waiting for a victory, even if you have to spend a lot, but Marion will be in his bed not today, so tomorrow, although even today is not all lost, he thought. I can't resist a question, said Tony, without taking his eyes off his beautiful companion for a second. And what do you want to ask? She asked, taking a sip of her martini. You don't have anyone right now? You're not seeing anyone. Tony was worried, but he hoped for the right answer. If there was, I wouldn't be sitting here with you right now, Marion replied. Glad to hear it, but surprised. How is this possible? After all, you must have 1 million fans at least. Well, and they are enough. I wouldn't date just anyone. Would you date me? Tony could not stand it. Marion smiled broadly. Isn't it too early to ask? I don't know you at all yet, just like you don't know me. What I know is enough for me. Well, and me to know time will hopefully be enough, because I am ready to pay attention to you every day. You only need my looks. I know men love with their eyes, but with women it's different. We look at other things. And what things do you look at? He asked. A man should be reliable, that with it, as behind a stone wall, that could solve my problems. Well, also honesty, purposefulness, loyalty, generosity. All this is difficult to find in one person, and I'm not used to change, answered Marion. And I'm just like that. With a smile on his lips, boasted Tony. In words, everyone is like that, especially when they want to get into bed, but in fact it turns out that it is not. It's impossible not to want someone like you. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but it's normal. Can I ask why your last relationship ended? So many questions the first time we met. You're so nosy, a little flirtatiously replied Marion. I have serious plans for you. Marion, I'm just crazy about you. I will not humor. I want everything at once, but ready to wait and fulfill all your whims. Well, it still needs to be checked, and not so fast everything and immediately. Why are you single? What's wrong with your ex-girlfriend? Or you to her? We quarreled a lot, couldn't come to an understanding. What was it exactly? I wasn't ready to marry her and have kids. Maybe I want to marry and have children. Then said Marion, are you ready even tomorrow? Replied Tony, and the girl laughed a little. How many times she heard something like that and on the fingers cannot count. I mean it, said Tony. I'm sure you are. I answered your question. What was your ex's mistake? There was too much of him, and a man should have his own space. I'm not someone's property or a dog that has to sit at his feet all the time. Then there's the jealousy. I can't stand that. Relationships without trust are impossible, and it's not my fault that men pay attention to me. That's how it is. I like confident men who don't stoop to jealousy. I see. I agree with you. Jealousy is a silly thing, and freedom should be allowed. They finished their dinner and Tony asked for the bill. The waiter left, and he looked at Marion and timidly put his hand over hers. Is this really the end of it? He asked in a whisper. That's all for today, the girl replied, gently removing her hand. I'm incredibly sorry. Have pity on me. I won't be able to sleep. You count sheep and go to sleep. It won't help. Will I see you tomorrow? He asked with hope in his voice. We could. For a long time I wanted to jump with a parachute, but I could not make up my mind. Now I'm ready. Will you join me? That's right. Tony was surprised. That's an interesting offer. Come on, what time should I pick you up? I think 12 o'clock would be fine. The waiter brought the bill and Tony paid about $300, thinking about what expenses awaited him tomorrow. Afterward, he helped Marion up from her chair and they left the restaurant. On the way, they chatted a bit about various topics, and when they reached her house, Marion didn't even let Tony kiss her. She jumped out of the car and rushed to her driveway without turning around. All that dough and not even a kiss. He muttered unhappily to himself and drove home. At home, Tony studied Marion's social networking page long and hard, flipping through her photos 100 times. He was tormented by a wild, unsatisfied desire, and his body reacted to the photo of the desired girl in a certain way. The mood was disgusting. The man could not find a place to be. After a little thinking, he went to the internet and began to look at the profiles of prostitutes. Having stopped on one, remotely similar to Marion, he dialed her number. Having agreed that within 40 minutes the night fairy would be at his place, he continued to look at Marion's photos. Feelings were feelings, but there was no going against physiology. He needed to relieve the tension and blow off steam, or he wouldn't live to see tomorrow. Selena, that was the night fairy's name, was punctual. Tony looked at her with an appraising gaze and invited her into the room. The girl was not bad looking, but she was far from the object of his desire. Since Tony's pants were already boiling, he got down to business without any further ado, pouncing on Selena. The first time was very quick, but it was immediately followed by a second, and after a short break, a third. Of course, he pictured Marion in front of him, and Selena had a similar figure and long blonde hair too. "How hungry you are," Selena said in a panting voice as the third time came to a close. "It's been a while," he replied. "Will you keep me overnight?" Tony looked at his watch. It had been an hour and a half since Selena had arrived at his place. The charge was $200 for 3 hours and $350 for the night. He decided it would be better to save money and make do with 3 hours. 3 hours would be enough. Only half of that time had passed. Tony lay on his back and put his hands behind his head and closed his eyes. "Make me feel good," he said, and Selena immediately got to work. Tony groaned slightly and introduced Marion again. A languid smile appeared on his lips and his mood soared. At least now he would be able to go out with Marion without sex for a while, without the risk of going at her like a crazed male. As Selena walked out after 3 hours, Tony thought about the fact that he'd have to pay less on his mortgage this month. He paid it off early, paying 3 installments a month, and with that, he had 2.5 years to pay it off. But it was good for him. He had a full discharge, so he would be able to sleep well at night. He was still looking forward to tomorrow. The only thing that was bothering him was the next expense. Tony turned on the computer again to look up the prices for the skydiving, and then he'd have to go to the restroom again. Tony was afraid to tell Marion that he wouldn't last that long. For God forbid she might scare him off, but he had to limit his expenses, and he thought about how to do it carefully without losing Marion. Sunday, Tony picked up Marion and took her to an extreme event for which he had purchased a discount coupon yesterday. The pleasure cost $9,500 in tandem with an instructor, and Tony decided to refrain from jumping. It was too expensive. Noticing Marion, Tony immediately got out of the car and opened the door for her. The girl was no less beautiful in her sports clothes than in her evening gown. "As always, you look divine," said Tony. "I try," she replied with a smile. "Aren't you scared? You haven't changed your mind?" "No, I'm mentally and physically ready." "Then let's go." Tony got behind the wheel and drove off. "After the jump, we can go for a little walk. We're going to the countryside. There's a forest and a lake," he said. "Good. We can go for a short while, and then, afterward, wherever you want to go. I'm all yours for the day. We can grab a bite to eat and catch a movie." "Whatever you say," Tony said. "Where do you want to eat?" He really hoped that this time not to such an expensive place. Marion shrugged her shoulders. "It's up to you," she replied, and Tony exhaled in relief. He looked at cafes near where they were going and found a good and budget option. That's where he decided to take Marion after their event. Marion got out of the car and looked up at the sky with a smile where parachutes were floating. "Awesome," she pronounced and looked at Tony. "Shall we go?" "Let's go," he said. The instructor came toward them and soon Marion was sitting in the airplane. "You're losing a lot," she said to Tony, because he had already voiced that he himself will not jump. "I do not want to, especially in a tandem. And no one will let a beginner jump on his own," he answered. "Do you need a photo and video?" asked the instructor. "Of course," replied Marion. Tony didn't show any sign that he wasn't thrilled with the idea. "You can pay afterward," said the instructor before entering the airplane. Tony stayed on the ground and watched as the plane took off, and then Marion jumped out of it in tandem with the instructor. The whole event took very little time, and soon the girl was walking towards him, smiling wholeheartedly. "This is just fantastic," she said. "Incredibly cool." She began to fix her disheveled hair. "I'm glad you like it," Tony said. I'm going to go change. Marion went to the hangar, and Tony was approached by the instructor. In an hour and a half will be ready photos and video, he said. How much do I owe you? Asked Tony. 10 photos and video on a disc of 1,500. Can I use the card? By wire. Okay. Tony transferred the money and went to the hangar to wait for Marion, who came out about 10 minutes later. The photo and video will have to wait a little longer. Let's take a walk to the lake. Come on, she answered. They walked leisurely through a field leading to a forest where there was a small lake. Tony gently took Marion's hand, hoping that she would let him at least walk with her like this. And to his delight, she didn't pull her hand out. I found a cozy place nearby where we can have lunch after the walk, he said. That's great. Did they have ice cream? I'm really craving some. I think so, but if not, we'll find it later. See, I'm ready to fulfill your every desire. He stopped and turned the girl around to face him. Don't you deserve even a kiss so far? He asked, looking hopefully into the eyes of the object of his dreams. We've known each other for a day and a half. I can't do that right away, she answered, pretending to be a little embarrassed. How much time do you need? He asked, trying to hide his disappointment. Just a kiss. He's already spent so much dough on her, and she can't even kiss him. Don't rush me. Tony, I like you, but we need to get to know each other, not all at once. I'm not used to it, and I don't want to. Then marry me and we'll get to know each other. You're quick, come right out. She laughed a little. Do you have a place to live? Yes, I have a 2-bedroom. So I have an apartment, I have a car, I earn a decent income, and I'm ready to start a family. I'll take that into account. Marion carefully took her hand out of his hand and reached for the sun, closed her eyes and directed her face to its gentle rays. That's good. Let's talk about something else, because you're talking about one thing at a time, she added. That's because I can't think about anything but you. I can neither sleep nor eat. I suffer, he answered. How much? She asked flirtatiously. Very much. Are you serious about marriage? Quite. I'm ready to take you to the registry office right now. No, not now, she said. Let's go to the lake. They went forward again, and Tony's chest was once again aflame. No girl had the same effect on him as Marion. After admiring the lake for a while, they went back and, taking the photo and the disc with the video, drove to the cafe. There Tony left 2,500, having fed Marion with delicious ice cream. But there was still a movie ahead, and together with the parachute and the photo shoot, it was still a lot of money. Every weekend, he would not be able to afford it, so he had to hint to Marion, and it was better to offer some kind of vacation that would not hit his pocket. When they got to the mall, they took tickets to the movie, which cost Tony $1,400, because Marion wanted to watch the movie in 3D and on the sofa. It was a full 40 minutes before the show, so Marion suggested walking around the mall. Wow, she exclaimed, looking at the display of small handbags. I've wanted one of those for a long time, she said. Seeing the price tag of $12,000, Tony swallowed convulsively. This is definitely too much, or she's just trying to divorce him. Like kissing and sex, so it's early, and such gifts to beg, so nothing normal. When's your birthday? He asked. In 7 months, she answered and went into the department, immediately asking the salesman to shove her bag closer. Tony's forehead broke into a sweat. No way, he would never buy her a bag, he thought, but he was still afraid of scaring Marion away and was on the verge of panic. Spinning the handbag in his hands, Marion said that it was perfect and she could not buy it. The girl went to the cash register, and Tony had no idea what to do. Nervously looking at the exit from the department, he followed her. But then Marion took out a bank card and paid for the bag herself. Tony immediately exhaled. He felt incredibly relieved. After paying, Marion handed the bag with her new clothes to Tony. There was one more place I wanted to look at while I had time, she said, taking him with her. This place turned out to be a lingerie store. Grabbing a few sets, Marion went to the fitting room. I wish I could take one look, Tony thought, imagining her half naked in one of the sets. His body was tense again, as if yesterday's release had never happened, except he didn't want any more Celine. He only wanted Marion. Soon the girl came out of the fitting room and put 2 sets of lingerie on the register, the cost of which turned out to be a little over $300. "That's a lot," she said in a frustrated tone, twirling both sets in her hands and trying to make an incredibly difficult choice in favor of one. "I have to go with one." "Oh," she sighed sadly, continuing to twirl the underwear in her hands. Watching Marion almost crying, unable to make a choice, Tony muttered to himself and pulled out his bank card. "We'll take both," he said, putting the card to the terminal and watching $300 fly out of his account. Then he looked at his watch. The movie was 15 minutes away, which was good, or God forbid he'd make another turn. Handing Tony the laundry bag, Marion pecked him on the cheek, rewarding him with her charming smile. "Thank you," she said. "I hope to see you in one of them in the near future." Tony replied. "Now it's time to go see the movie." "Let's go," she answered, taking him under her arm. Tony watched the men squinting at his companion, and he was filled with pride that he was walking under the arm of such a beauty. Proudly raising his head and smiling, he led Marion to the elevator. He carefully wiped off his 3D glasses and gave them to Marion. And when the movie started, he let himself shyly put his arm around her shoulder, and she let him do it, which gave Tony hope that everything would work out with the girl of his dreams. "What did you think of the movie?" Tony asked as they walked out of the theater. "I liked it a lot. How about you?" "It was okay. I liked it," he said. "Shall we have coffee?" "Sure." There were many small cafes on the 3rd floor, in one of which they had coffee and cakes, and after Tony drove Marion home, before the girl left his car, he got bolder and kissed her himself before she could realize it. "I'm crazy about you," he whispered after that brief kiss. "Why don't you come to my place?" "Tony, don't rush me," she said seriously. Marion responded to his kiss, but pulled Tony away from her as his hands crawled to her breasts. "If I survive, you have no idea what's happening to me right now," he replied, leaning back in his seat. The girl smiled indulgently. "I'll see you tomorrow. Lunch together?" "Sure," he answered and took her hand and touched his lips to it. "I'll be up all night thinking about you." "See you tomorrow," said Marion and kissed him lightly on the lips. "A little bonus," she whispered and left his car. Tony closed his eyes and sighed. This is what he's going to do in this state, he thought. He's screwed. There's no way he'll give up now. Marion will be his, but just how to speed up the process. Harvey approached Tony as soon as he sat down at his workplace. "How was your date with the hottie?" he asked. "It was fine," he replied. "We spent both days together." Wow, she didn't blow you off." "Why would she blow me off?" Tony asked unhappily. "No offense, so what was it?" "Menace almost 50 grand. Harvey whistled. "Yeah, I told you couldn't afford it. Almost a third of your paycheck in one weekend alone." "Well, it's the first date, then it will be more modest. I'm not an oligarch, so no money will be enough," Tony replied. "In such a girl you need to invest, so you better look for a job in the night," with a smile said Harvey. "One can live well without such expenses. There are plenty of cafes where no less delicious than in this Turandot, and entertainment can be cheap and cool. Next weekend, I'll organize the program myself on a budget." "I see. What was it?" "You didn't waste your money, did you?" "I wish. Just a little handshake, a kiss, and a little hug at the movies. Not much for that kind of spending," Harvey commented. "Well, it'll come back soon enough. All right, let's get back to work." "Come on, are you going to lunch with her?" "With her." Harvey went back to his desk. Time passed quickly. It was time to go to lunch, and Tony hurried to Marion's office. It didn't take long for the girl to arrive, and together they went down to the cafe on the first floor. Set lunches cost $10, but after estimating that each day was $20 and multiplying this sum by 22 working days, Tony became sharply sad. "Are you doing okay?" Marion asked, noticing that Tony was thinking about something. "Yes, I didn't sleep well," he answered and smiled. "Do you want a ride home today?" "That'd be nice. Bring you to work in the morning would be nice too," Marion replied, giving him her snow-white smile. "I'd love to. Why don't you move in with me? I'll drive you every day," he said. "Maybe," the girl replied in a mysterious tone. "When?" Tony asked immediately. "I don't know yet. Time will tell. You sure you want me dead? He said. You're just rushing things. It's just that I'm crazy about you, and you're making fun of me. No, I'm not. Relationships should be gradual, not all at once. I want to get to know you better. I'm afraid of making another mistake. I'll tell you everything about me, and I'd do anything for you. You won't make a mistake. Marion, I'm very serious. I'm not kidding. Marion again smiled broadly and touched his hand. Then be patient and don't rush me, she said. I am both patient and ready to wait. It's just very difficult, Tony replied, looking at the girl with loving eyes. After lunch, Tony went back to his workplace. He caught Veronica's sad look several times, and he barely restrained himself from telling her that it pissed him off. But he decided to just ignore it, especially since he didn't care about her at all. By now, everyone knew he had Marion's hooks into him, and Veronica was no exception. He was catching envious glances from men today, and he was overwhelmed with a sense of his own superiority over them. Except that the financial side of things was very stressful. He had some cash reserves, but at this rate it would quickly run out, and he wanted to pay off the mortgage faster. After work, Tony met Marion at her office, and they went downstairs. Are we going home? He asked, starting the car. We can stop somewhere for dinner, answered Marion. Can we go to your place or mine and cook dinner ourselves? Tony again. I would be very pleased if you cooked me dinner, Tony replied. I don't mind at all, but just dinner and no pestering. Really? I'll do it. You or me? The man cheered up dramatically. Let's go to my place so you don't have to go back and forth, except I have an empty fridge. No problem. We'll stop at the store. Okay. What are we cooking? It's up to you. I'll eat whatever your beautiful hands make. Tony stopped the car at the nearest supermarket, and taking the cart at the entrance, he and Marion went into the store. How about baked trout and fried potatoes and a vegetable salad? Asked Marion. That's fine. Let's do it. Marion began to put in the cart products, but except for the trout and vegetables, there were shrimp, expensive juice, cheese, olive oil, sausage cut, scallops, a piece of beef, and much more. Tony realized that Marion had decided to stock her empty refrigerator. Having laid out at the cash register about $200, he regretted 100 times that he had asked to have dinner at her house, because in a cafe it would have cost him much cheaper. Saved? B. He cursed to himself, dragging the grocery bags to the car. Once in Marion's apartment, Tony gasped. A posh 3-bedroom with a huge hallway and kitchen, furnished with expensive furniture and tastefully decorated. And you live alone in such a nice place? He was surprised. Yes. Did you inherit it? No. Only part of the down payment. The rest was taken in the mortgage, but there is still half a year to pay. I spent almost my entire paycheck on it. My ex used to pay the down payment, but now I'm on my own. I'll pay it off and then I can breathe, because now I'm restricting myself. How big a payment? $2,000 a month to pay it off faster. I'm paying it off early too. Why do you need a place like this on your own? I won't always be alone. Are you ready to let a man into your territory? Tony was surprised. Why not? So, if anything, and kick out easier. Marion laughed. Let's go cook dinner. Having filled the refrigerator with food, Marion started to fish, and Tony asked her to peel potatoes. The two of them did it quickly, and in a little over an hour, dinner was ready. Delicious, said Tony, savoring a piece of trout. I'm a good cook, boasted Marion. You have no flaws. That's why I dream of marrying you, said Tony. Everyone has flaws, replied Marion. Tell me about yours, immediately said Tony. What a sly one. So I'll tell you all my secrets at once, she replied cheerfully. Just a little bit. Well, I am very demanding to men, although it is rather a virtue who looks at it. I already realized that. What else? Now you tell me. I'm a little sloppy, but I'll make up for it for you, Tony replied. Finished with dinner, Marion put the dirty dishes in the dishwasher and sat down at the table again. Will you pick me up tomorrow morning? She asked. Or maybe we can drive from here together. Tony got up from his chair and squatted down next to Marion. He took her hands in his and started kissing her. I love you, don't I? He whispered. Tony, she began to say, but he didn't give her a chance to continue, his lips on hers. He was seized by a frenzy of desire. He lifted Marion from the chair and took her in his arms and carried her to the nearest room. The girl resisted, but he continued on, ignoring her until he had her on the bed and Marion had the finesse to kick him in the groin. "What are you doing?" he moaned, bending in half. "What were you doing?" Roughly she asked and got up from the bed. "You're acting like an animal. Go away, Tony." "Animal? It's normal for people to want physical intimacy with the one they love. If you don't like me, why are you torturing me? We've known each other for 3 days. Torturing you? I told you 100 times I can't do it this fast. I asked you not to rush me, you promised, but you just pounced on me like a maniac. I'm sorry, I can't control myself when you're around." The pain subsided and Tony got up from the bed. "I'm sorry, I couldn't help it." "All right. Come on, you have to go." Tony left the room and followed Marion to the door. Before leaving her apartment, he looked at the girl with eyes full of longing and pain. "Have you forgiven me?" he whispered. "Forgiven?" Marion came up and kissed him lightly on the lips, and then whispered in his ear, "Don't rush it." A shiver ran through his entire body as her lips touched his earlobe. "My body reacts to you in a certain way and I can't control it. I want you," he confessed. "Don't get yourself worked up. Tony, I like you, I told you, but you're in too much of a hurry, it's stressful. It's hard to keep my cool around you. I'll go then." Lowering his head, he said, and Marion kissed him lightly on the lips again. Tony tried to hug her, but she immediately pulled away from him. "See you tomorrow," she said, smiling meaningfully. "See you tomorrow. I'll be waiting for you in the yard in the morning." "Good," she replied. Tony sat in the car and wrapped his arms around his head. What a bitch, he thought, a dynamo. She's just making money and keeping him on a short leash, telling him that they'll have it all ahead of them. He'd be ruined before he got there. He'll have to get up an hour earlier to pick up Marion. After sitting like that for a few minutes, he drove home. When he entered the apartment, he immediately took a cold shower to cool down a little, to call Sveta or anyone else. He did not want to spend money, especially since thanks to Marion, they were flying away at a breakneck speed. And he didn't want anyone but her. In the morning, having had breakfast, Tony called Marion and told her that he was leaving. A little less than an hour later, he was standing in front of her driveway. "Hi," she said cheerfully as she approached the car. "Hi," he replied, squeezing out a smile. The girl kissed him on the lips and got into the car. They drove halfway in silence. "Are you angry with me?" she asked. "No, it just hurts," he answered, and she immediately realized what place he was talking about and smiled, not answering anything. "Are we going to lunch together today?" she asked. "Sure," he replied. "Will I see you at the weekend? My friends are calling me for a barbecue, and I wanted to suggest that you come with me. A friend has a summer house near the city. Will you come with me for both days?" "I'll think about it," replied Marion. She did not particularly complain about such trips to strangers. "I have normal friends. All with girlfriends, by the way. I've already told them that I'm coming with my girlfriend." "You did?" she asked. "That's what I said. That's what he said." "All right then, I'll do it. Let's go." Tony immediately smiled. When they reached the business center, they went inside, holding hands, and Tony again watched the envious glances of the men in the center. Once they reached the right floor, they said their goodbyes until lunch and dispersed to their offices. On Wednesday, Marion said she was meeting a friend in the evening, so Tony didn't need to drive her home. The man was tense at first, thinking whether it was with a friend, but when he saw that after finishing work, Marion was met by a girl in a Volvo, he immediately relaxed. Before getting into the car, Marion kissed him on the cheek. "See you tomorrow," she said, rewarding Tony with her charming smile. "See you tomorrow," he replied, escorting her with his gaze until her friend's car disappeared around the corner. "Is this your new one?" asked Alexandra, Marion's best friend, when they drove away from the business center. "So, another sucker," she answered and laughed. "That sucker drools on you so normally," she said. "Oh yes, he could use a bib." "How long have you been playing?" "Not long. At first I thought he might be normal, but he's not. He's got one thing on his mind. It's funny to see his face change every time he spends money on me, and he spends it on his own initiative," answered Marion. Poor guy, with a smile, said her friend. Well, would say, as it is, there is not so much dough. I cannot pull such expenses. And he is silent, gritting his teeth and paying for everything, anticipating how to fuck me, thinking that I am obviously sold. So why are you wasting your time with him? I wonder when he'll run out. I'm not gonna sleep with him. You're having fun, Alexandra replied with a smile. A little. How are you doing? I'm good. The usual. There is interesting news. The girl smiled enigmatically. We're here. Let's sit down at a table and I'll tell you about it. Alexandra parked at a small restaurant, and getting out of the car, the friends entered it, sitting down at a table which they had reserved in advance. Billy is coming for good in a week, said Alexandra, and from Marianne's lips immediately fell a smile. I'm not interested, she answered dryly, taking the menu in her hands. That's not all. He's divorced, her friend continued. Wow, it happens. Oh, come on. Can't you see why? I don't want to understand, and I don't care about his life. Don't lie to me. He's already rented an office here and he's hiring. So he left his beautiful life in Florida and came home. And you didn't believe he was getting a divorce. I still don't. Let's not talk about him. I mean, he'll be here soon. Just wait. Marian looked at her friend and smiled haughtily. Why did you bring him up? You only spoiled my mood, she said. You dreamed not so long ago that he divorced. And now it happened, and you are not happy, Alexandra answered. It's been over a year. I've been rethinking a lot of things. Fallen out of love? Marian, but you are just made for each other. But he could not leak his wife then. He would if he really loved me. That's it. Marian wrinkled her nose and waved her hand. Change the record. It's up to you, of course. He was asking about you. Alexa, I realize he's your husband's best friend and all, but don't make excuses for him. I'm not. And you knew that Billy was married when you two got involved. He was gonna get a divorce when he found out Sima was seriously ill. How do you leave a sick person? And now that she's healthy, I guess he decided to do it. Good for him. But the train's gone. You know how many tears I shed for him. I'm not going to cry over any man ever again. Never again. But with all sorts of suckers you waste time and on the money they put down. Alexandra shook her head disapprovingly. Fools should be taught. And they put themselves down themselves. Don't give Billy my phone number and tell him where I work. I don't want to see him. He'll find you without me, especially if he knows where you live. A waiter approached the girls, interrupting their conversation. Ready to order? He asked. I'll have the crab, lamb salad, lavender raspberry creme fraiche, orange juice, and berry tea, said Marian. I'll have the same, but instead of lamb salad, I'll have sturgeon. Alexandra made her order and turned to her friend again. How do you work at the new place? Why do you need it at all? I wanted to. Normal work like everyone else, replied Marian, understanding where the friend is going. And the money that Billy sends you, did not you spend? No, I haven't even looked at that bill. When he gets here, he can have it all. I don't want nothing from him. He's a benefactor. Thinks money will throw money, and I, as Penelope, will wait for him to condescend to me. Probably strung her nose, said Marian. And yet you are wrong about him. Well, let's not argue. He will come here. You'll figure out your relationship. I forget what his name is. You know, the one you dated for 6 months. Did he back off? He is. You're Othello. There are no normal men, Sasha, no. Well, my Barry is quite normal, so don't generalize. Alexandra said of her husband and added, Billy too, by the way. Well, consider yourself lucky, and please stop. That's it. Change of subject. Marian said irritably. The waiter brought their order, and the girls began to eat. Marian's thoughts were now completely occupied with Billy, the only man she really loved, but she had broken off the relationship with him a little over a year ago. Billy was a friend of Alexandra's husband and lived in Florida, occasionally visiting on business. That's how he and Marian had met one day on another of his visits. Billy had all the qualities that should have had an ideal man for Marian, except that Billy was married, and the role of mistress did not suit the girl. Favorite promised to divorce, but his wife was seriously ill. What exactly Marian did not know, because she did not need these details. In the end, Billy asked to wait, promised that later, when she recovered, that he could not leave her in such a difficult moment, but he loved only Marion. All excuses, she thought then. Old as the world, they broke up, and then tears and pain, disappointment, depression, loss of interest in life. Billy called, came to visit, begged her not to tear things up like that, begged her to give him some time. But Marion was adamant it was now or never, and he never got divorced. And so a friend opened an old wound, making her remember the past and feel again the echoes of the pain she had experienced then. Thursday morning, Tony picked up Marion. That she didn't look the same as usual, he noticed at once. She looked as if she had cried all night, which was almost true. "Marion, what's wrong?" he asked anxiously. "Nothing. Everything is fine," she answered and got into the car. "Have you been crying?" "It was my allergies," she lied and smiled. "It'll go away. I already took a pill." "You sure?" "I'm sure." Marion took out her makeup bag from her new purse and started to put on her makeup. She'd been up half the night and had almost overslept for work. There was no time to put on makeup, so she had to go like that, with puffy and slightly red eyes. "How was it with your girlfriend?" asked Tony while Marion put on makeup. "Fine. Went to a wonderful restaurant. Very tasty there. Maybe we'll have dinner there tonight," she asked. Tony tensed up. "I'd love to, but I can't tonight," he lied. "I have to help my parents, I promised, so I'll drop you home after work and go straight to them." "Some other time then," she answered calmly. When they got to the business center, they went to the offices, agreeing, as in all the last days, to go to lunch together. "So is our star still dynamiting you?" asked Harvey Tony when he returned from lunch. "This weekend we're going to my friend's country house. Everything will be there," he answered smugly. "Are you sure?" "Sure. Nature, kebab, booze. We'll sleep in the same room. And if she agreed to go like this, she already agrees to have sex. How much longer can we keep dragging this out? It's obvious she likes me. So envy me, Harvey. Not everyone can have a girl like that." Tony had a smug smile on his lips. "Don't get too excited before the time, as if she wouldn't stand me up again," Harvey replied. "Don't be jealous," said Tony and stared at the monitor. Friday. Getting into Tony's car, Marion sighed sadly and looked at the man. "Tony, I'm so sorry, but I can't go to your friend's dacha," sadly she said, and Tony felt a chill inside him. "What's wrong?" "Why?" he asked, trying to contain his resentment. "Here." Marion showed her hand and Tony didn't realize what was wrong. "What?" he asked, looking at the girl's fingers. "The nail is broken. It's not proper to ride with such nails." "Well, and something else," she answered. "That's not the reason. If it's so important to you, after work we'll stop by the salon and get your nails done." "What else?" "Well, I also started something this morning." Tony knew what she was talking about right away. He felt like smoke was coming out of his ears. This is just a joke, he thought. "That's no reason either," he answered, although it was still a reason. Marion had made it clear that there would be no sex again. "Anything else?" "Nothing else. If you are not embarrassed by my these days and we will stop by the salon tonight, I see no reason not to go," she answered. Marion saw perfectly well how Tony was freaking out, trying not to show it, but it was not good at it. She understood perfectly well that at the cottage he hoped to finally get what she had denied him so far. Only this time he will be a bummer, Marion thought and smiled a little. They stopped by the salon after work. Marion had a new manicure, for which Tony charged $50. She was going to pay for it herself, but he beat her to it. And the girl did not object. It was his business. No one forced him after all. The way to the cottage of Tony's friend was not close, so at 6 in the morning, he picked up Marion. On the way they turned to the store where Tony bought a bottle of martini, mango, and a huge watermelon. It was uncomfortable to go empty-handed, even though his friend said he didn't need to bring anything. He wanted to celebrate his promotion at work, so he bought everything himself. "Do you have water in the car?" Marion asked, taking pills out of her purse. "There's a whole bottle in the glove compartment," he answered. "What kind of pill?" When these days my stomach always hurts a lot. Here is a painkiller I want to take," she answered and took out some water. Tony still hoped that no matter what days they had it would happen tonight. Especially he didn't care if it was these days or not. It didn't matter at all. All week he'd been thinking only about intimacy with Marion, anticipating how this weekend he finally get to her body. Marion, on the other hand, was always thinking about Billy. The memories were haunting her, and she couldn't imagine how she could face him again and resist if he started to pursue her. No, she wouldn't give up right away. How much she'd suffered for him, how much she'd cried. Let him suffer too. Tell him she's getting married. Thinking about it, Marion looked at Tony. To him, the poor guy was already exhausted. She even felt sorry for Tony for a moment. Only he's an asshole, and he's certainly no match for her. All she could think about was one thing. What kind of husband is he? He's not. All he thinks about is what's in his pants and the expense account. There's nothing to compare him to Billy night and day. What's on your mind? Tony asked her, interrupting her thoughts. Nothing much, replied Marion, looking out the window. The weather is nice today. Yes, it's lucky, agreed Tony, continuing to think about how to get to her at night. Once at his friend's cottage, Tony noticed with what amazement all the men present there, staring at his companion. After introducing Marion to his friends and her friends to him, he escorted her into the house, to the room they had been given for the night. Marion said she wanted to lie down for a while. She was tired from the road, and her stomach was still a little sore. Can't you take another pill? Asked Tony. I can't take too many. I'll lie down for an hour and it will be fine, she said. All right then, get some rest. I'm going to go help and I'll be back in an hour. Tony left the room and went down to his friends. Is this really your girlfriend? Asked one of them as Tony approached. Yes, why are you so surprised? He asked in a slightly arrogant tone. She looks like the cover of a magazine. A model? Where'd you find one of those? That's a lot of questions. What's the difference? Well, Tony, that's a surprise, said the other friend. Not a girl. A dream. You keep your voice down or your friend will hear about dreams. A third friend laughed. Where are your girls? Asked Tony and looked around. They're in the closed kitchen sorting out the food. They'll be here in a minute. Chatting with his friends, Tony lost track of time, and when he looked at his watch, he realized that it had been 2 hours, not an hour. I'm going to go see how Marion is doing, he said and went into the house. Marion was sound asleep with her pillow in her arms when Tony came into the room. There was still plenty of time before the feast, so he decided that he should not wake her now, let her sleep. Closing the door, he turned back to his friends. Tired. We left early. Let her sleep, he said. Marion opened her eyes and stretched. She looked at her watch and realized that she had slept for more than 4 hours. When she heard the sound of approaching footsteps, she got out of bed and began to comb her somewhat disheveled hair. You awake? Tony said with a smile as he entered the room. He immediately walked over to the girl and put his arms around her, imprinting a kiss on her neck. Marion pulled away from the man. Tony, well, I'm combing my hair, she said. Is everything ready there already? Because I'm hungry. I was just following you to call you to the table. Everything's ready, he said. Good, she said with a smile. They left the house and came to the table outside, where 3 of Tony's friends were already gathered together with their girlfriends, who looked at Marion with scrutinizing glances. Hello, everyone, she said with a smile, sitting down at the table. Shashlik, fruits, vegetables, everything was delicious, but the company. Marion felt like a white crow. Tony's friends took turns squinting at her, as did their friends, except that their looks were different. Definitely the girls didn't like her company. Tony, on the other hand, he sat there like a pompous turkey, showing that she was his girlfriend and feeling his superiority over his friends and their conversations. What kind of shallow people, Marion thought, regretting that she had come here. There was nothing to talk about and no one to talk to. Tony noticed that Marion was bored and offered her a walk, and she agreed. After a few laps around the garden, they came back after a couple of hours and were told that the bathhouse was about to be heated. I'm not going, she said to Tony. Why not? He asked. We'll go separately, you and the girls. It's those days, she said. Ah, he blurted it out. He'd forgotten all about it. Well, I'll go quickly. Marion sat down on the garden swing and took her phone out of her purse. While everyone was in the bath, she opened an old folder that she had never been able to delete and began to look at the photos from when she and Billy had been together. There's no one like him anymore, she thought, and smiled sadly. Are we going to sleep in the same room? Marion asked surprised when she was about to go to bed and Tony showed up on the doorstep. Well, yes, he answered and began to take off his pants. Well then, you sleep on the couch. She nodded toward the small couch against the wall. Marion, are you kidding? He asked unhappily. There's not enough room for two, she replied. The bed was indeed small, and two adults would not be comfortable sleeping on it. It's fine. He settled down next to her and immediately, taking her in his arms, began to kiss her, but when he felt resistance on her part, he pulled away, making a disgruntled grimace. You smell like beer. I can't stand that odor. Wrinkling her beautiful nose, said Marion. And you forgot again that I have these days, she added and turned her back to Tony. Remembering all the mad words, he said them to himself. Grabbing a pillow, Tony abruptly got out of bed and went to sleep on the couch. Patience was at an end, and he could hardly resist taking it by force. Why did you come here with me then? He muttered. To spend time in nature, she answered. And I told you I'm having these days and probably shouldn't go, but you didn't see it as a problem. And now you're freaking out because there's no sex. Tony, you and I are not going to work out with that attitude, she sighed. We're gonna make it work. I'm sorry I didn't hold back again and sleep well, he said, startled by her words. I just love you so much. Good night, Tony, Marion said and yawned defiantly. Tony did not have a good night. His whole body was aching and his head was full of thoughts. He began to think that Marion was getting off the hook, and he was thinking hard about what to do to prevent her from bumping him off. He got up at 6 in the morning and drove to the nearest place that sold flowers. After buying a bouquet for $200, he went back and waited until Marion woke up to give her the flowers and beg forgiveness for his behavior yesterday. Tony didn't leave the room, waiting for Marion to wake up. As soon as she opened her eyes, he immediately walked over to her and handed her a bouquet of pink roses. Thank you, she replied, accepting the flowers. They're beautiful. I should put them somewhere. She looked around for a vase. I'm sorry I jumped on you again yesterday, Tony said and leaned in to kiss her, but Marion buried her nose in the flowers, inhaling their scent. How they smell, she said with a smile. So have you forgiven me? Asked Tony. I'll forgive you if you don't behave like that again, and I'd like to go home after breakfast. Tony looked at the girl in surprise. I was thinking of going after lunch, he said. Well then, call me a cab. I want to leave early, she answered calmly. Are you in a hurry, or do you hate it here so much? I don't know what to do for another half a day. I want to go home. All right then, we'll go after breakfast then, he said a little disappointed. Is breakfast ready yet? I don't know. Tony shrugged his shoulders. I'll have a look and find the vase in the meantime. Tony left the room and Marion flopped down on the bed again, putting the bouquet beside her. It amused her to see Tony going out of his way to get to her body, even confessing his love. Thinking about it, she grinned. Funny fool. There's no love here, not even close. Time to end this conversation, she thought, and got up from the bed. Didn't your princess like it here? Asked one of Tony's friends when he informed them that they were leaving after breakfast. She's not feeling well and it's a long way to go. She has to go to work tomorrow, Tony replied. You know, I was watching you two last night, and you're not a couple at all. No offense, said the other friend. Tony pompous and looked at his friend. Why is that? He asked. Dear girl, replied the other one. That's right. One of the girls joined the conversation. Her sneakers alone cost probably half my salary, and her tracksuit is not cheap. As long as I can remember, Tony, you've always had simple girls, and this one's a bimbo. And she's too pretty. You'll be jealous all the time. One of your friends added. We're fine. What about breakfast? Tony waved me off. It's ready. Call your pretty lady. If she eats an omelet with sausage. Tony followed Marianne, and soon everyone was sitting at the table, watching whether Marianne would eat such a simple breakfast. Tony, can I make an omelet without sausage? Asked the girl, rewarding everyone with her charming smile. Sure, right away. Tony jumped up from his seat and went to the refrigerator. What else are you having? Just an omelet and tea and cake. Marianne looked at the cottage cheese pie, the aroma of which filled the entire small kitchen in the house. After breakfast, Tony and his companion were escorted to the car, and then the whole company began to discuss Marion, and all inclined to the fact that she is not suitable for Tony. "And what do you plan to do the rest of the day?" asked Tony Marion while they drove home. "So on the house need to do something, and just lie down, a movie or something to watch," she answered. "Why don't we lay together?" Tony's voice broke out. Again, Marion almost laughed. "Just lie down together and watch a movie, and I'll help you around the house. I want to rest alone for a while. I need some privacy sometimes." "I see," Tony frowned. "I'll pick you up tomorrow then." "Okay, are you going to the cafe tomorrow night?" "What cafe?" Tony was surprised. "Well, it was Veronica's birthday yesterday. She invited me over on Friday. As far as I know, all of you will be there, and she invited me too." Tony shrugged. "Nobody said anything to me. She's probably upset with me, so she didn't invite me." Tony replied and grinned. "Veronica has been in love with me for a long time," he added. "Have you two been dating?" asked Marion. "No. You what? She's not my type at all. It's never possible for me and Veronica to have a relationship." He said that like she was a lipper, noted Marion, because Tony said it all in such a tone, as if he Quasimodo matchmaker. "Marion, to be honest, you know her, it's understandable. You probably talked to her. But I'm judging purely from a man's point of view. Veronica is completely uninteresting. She doesn't look after herself, and she has a child. It would be very difficult for her to find a man. I guess some people like fat people. She should look for the right man in general." "Well, you're wrong about not keeping track. She's always got her hair, makeup, manicure, and neatly dressed. She's not fat. She's a little overweight, but she's pretty. I don't really understand about the man in question." "Do you think you are too good for Veronica?" asked Marion, realizing that that's exactly what this peacock thinks. "I am interested in only one girl, and all the others I do not care." Tony replied and smiled at Marion. "I only said that people like Veronica are not my type at all. And if I had a child, would you still like me as much?" suddenly asked Marion. "Of course, you're a different matter." Tony was lying. Although, as far as Marion was concerned, he probably wouldn't be stopped by anything. He hadn't considered such options for himself, but he'd give up a lot for a woman like that. Tony returned home in a bad mood. After some thought, he called Selena and invited her to this place for a couple hours. He just needed a release, and he got it. And next weekend, he would finally get to Marion as well. No more playing cat and mouse. No more of these days would get in the way. And it's time to set the record straight. He'd never spent as much time running after a girl as he had with her, and certainly never spent as much money on any girl as he had on this one. Monday, Tony came to pick up Marion as usual, and together they made their way to work. Once in the office, the first thing Tony did was walk over to Veronica. "Happy past," he said, sitting down on the edge of her desk. "Thank you," she replied. "I hear everyone's going to the cafe today to celebrate your birthday, and you didn't invite me." "Did you?" she asked and looked at Tony. "I thought I told everyone on Friday. Maybe you weren't in your office." "Maybe I was. So can I join you?" "Oh, sure. I invited the whole team." "Veronica, did Mariana say anything about me?" "No, we're not close friends." "Right. That's a shame." He sighed heavily and went to his desk, where Harvey came over. "Hey," he said. "Hi, Harvey." Tony knew he was going to start asking him about the weekend. "Tell me about it." "Everything is fine," Tony replied with a smile. "Is it finally happening?" Harvey wondered. It's done," Tony lied. "Well, congratulations. So you two are really together?" "Of course we are. I didn't believe it till the last minute." "I told you she'd be mine," Tony said smugly. "Can you afford it from here?" "If you're smart about everything, you can cut costs, so it's fine. You'll be at our wedding." "Is it that serious? When are you planning it?" "I don't know yet, but I don't think it's far off." Tony imagined his and Marion's wedding, and the thought came to his mind whether to buy a ring and propose to her. She'd know he was really serious, and if she said no, why would she? I'm sure he will. On Saturday, he would invite her to a restaurant, buy flowers and propose, and then take her to his place and keep her up all night, proving how much he loved her. Before going to the cafe, Marion asked Tony to turn to the flower store. Let's buy her 5 roses, Tony suggested. Veronica did not want to spend it all, especially since he had already given $200 for a gift just today and collected the money to give to the birthday girl in the evening. I like this one, said Marion, looking at the bouquet for $100. Marion, if all employees give such gifts, so you can go broke, replied he. But how she will like it, I'll take it myself. Marion took the bouquet out of the vase and went to the cash register. Tony only sighed, but did not offer to pay for the bouquet himself. And what is the gift in the bag? He asked. In the morning, Marion left the house with it, and then left it in Tony's car. A set of cosmetics with Dead Sea salts. Expensive, I suppose? Asked Tony. I have a friend who drives. She and her husband have stores around the city, but it costs me very reasonable. In general, the cosmetics are elite and worth their money. What do you give? We're splurging. An envelope of money will be handed over, he answered, thinking about the fact that Veronica will not help any elite cosmetics and why she needs it. And also, he did not understand why Marion gives such an expensive gift to just an acquaintance. He used to give his ex-girlfriends a birthday gift for a maximum of $200, and this together with flowers. That's how Marion squanders money, and then she doesn't have enough for herself. Tony sighed heavily and took 5 of the cheapest roses, because it was inconvenient to go without flowers. The party was in the middle of the party, when the slope dance Marion invited Tony's colleague, which he immediately rewarded with a sizzling look. All the dance, Tony did not take his eyes off the dancing couple, nervously rubbing his napkin in his hands. He remembered that Marion didn't like being jealous, but he couldn't help it. The other man was touching her with his hands, and it was driving him crazy. As soon as the next slow song played, he immediately dragged Marion to dance until someone else intercepted. After the cafe, we always go home, he asked. Of course, and get up early again tomorrow, she said. I hope to spend the weekend together. Not this weekend. I took Friday off. I want to go to Chicago for 3 days. I have a friend who lives there, and on Saturday it's her birthday. Marion replied, and Tony's face changed dramatically. 25 again. Always something. Don't you want to take me with you? He asked wistfully, thinking about the fact that in these seas she will not let the local men pass. I didn't think about it, replied Marion, amazed at Tony's persistence. She was sure that he was about to get away from her, but he was not going to give up. Would you go with me? Sure, I'd love to, he said. They'd be sure to have everything happen there, and none of these days would get in the way. All right then, let's do it, she answered and smiled, still amazed at Tony. That evening, Tony started looking for tickets. Wanting and needing, that was putting it mildly. He looked up the cost of business class tickets and his eyes almost popped out of his forehead. No, it was too much. But how would Marion feel if he bought economy? Should he not fly? No, we have to go. You can't let her go alone. Tony gutted the last of his stash of money and asked his parents to send him $3,000 to borrow. With $1,500, he had tickets for 2 to Chicago and back. He had never flown business class himself, but he was sure that Marion had flown only that way. Having bought the tickets, he immediately called the girl to let her know. How much do I owe you? Asked Marion, barely restraining laughter when Tony proudly announced that he had purchased seats in business class. You're insulting me, he replied. All this is a small thing. The main thing is that we will be together and you will be comfortable. Tony, I insist. The pleasure is not cheap, she said. You don't have to give me anything back. If I'm in love, there's nothing I wouldn't do for the one I love. And I hope that in Chicago, you'll finally warm up to me. Tony decided that he would buy a ring and propose to Marion there. Marion felt sorry for Tony at this point, considering she was about to explain to him that there would be no relationship between them. Even though he was a sucker, she didn't want to leave him pantsless. He wasn't going to slow down, so she didn't want to drag out the conversation about the impossibility of a relationship between them. She'd tell him right after she got back from Chicago. On Thursday, after Tony drove Marion home, he went straight to the jewelry store. He didn't know much about jewelry, but he imagined that diamonds cost a lot of money. In the end, he spent almost all his money on tickets and a ring, but the man decided that this was the last installment, which would certainly justify itself. There was still money left for spending and a bouquet of flowers. Not much, but it should be enough, Tony thought. Now Marion would definitely not go anywhere from him. The flight was not tiring, and at the airport they were waiting for a car, which was sent for them by Marion's friend. "Is your friend an oligarch?" asked Tony as they pulled away from the airport. "Her parents are," answered the latter. "They have several restaurants and cafes, as well as a huge pastry shop." There were no oligarchs in Tony's entourage, and he suddenly felt uncomfortable, imagining what kind of company would gather at this party. "And what do your parents work?" he asked. They have never talked to Marion about her family. "My father is also in business, and my mother is a psychologist. We've been fighting for over a year." Marion did not want to tell him in detail about her family and their relationship. The girl's father was a very wealthy man, but it was not easy with him. Tired of his dictatorship, Marion flipped out and left home. She sold her grandmother's apartment, which she inherited, and bought the one in which she now lives. That's when she met Billy, who was also a very poor man and fully provided for her. But Marion then wanted to prove to the whole world that she herself is worth something, especially not for nothing she studied at the university. Being still in a relationship with Billy, she got a job, and now, working in the office next door to Tony, she held the position of head of the department with a salary of $5,000 and was quite able to provide for herself and pay the mortgage. Billy, on the other hand, continued to send her money every month into an account that Marion hadn't used in a long time. Billy never counted the money, continuing to help her despite the fact that they had broken up. In fact, he was very different from all those slobbering spitfires like Tony. Billy valued Marion as a person, and he didn't just care about her expenses, and he wasn't obsessed with sex alone. "I see, and my common people live in Eagle," replied Tony, realizing why this girl is used to a beautiful life. "This is a house," said Tony, darting his eyes when they drove into the territory, surrounded by a high brick fence. There were girls in swimsuits, music playing loudly, and vases of fruit and drinks on the small round tables by the pool. As soon as they got out of the car, a girl with long brown hair came up to them with a smile on her face. She immediately gave Marion a hug. "Hi, darling. It's so good to see you," she said, and then looked at Tony in surprise. "Alice," she introduced herself. "Tony, nice to meet you," Tony mumbled, trying not to stare at the girl's breasts, which were barely covered by her bikini top. Of course, Marion was the best, but her friend was very good too, and there were plenty of beauties here. "You can put your things on the second floor in the corner room. And come on in," said Alice. While they were walking to the house, Marion hugged a few more beauties and men. "Do you know them all?" asked Tony. "Sure," replied Marion. "Why are you so tense?" "I didn't expect it to be like this," answered Tony. "So it's like this?" asked Marion, knowing exactly what he meant. "Well, that everything is so cool and there will be so many people," answered Tony. "It's always like that here. Relax and rest," replied Marion. They went into the house, and Tony, looking around, realized that he would never make money on such a thing. Surely Marion's parents have no worse. That girl was used to luxury, and with his salary of 150 grand, he couldn't afford anything less. But on the other hand, she had invited him here, so he had every chance to expect reciprocity, especially since many women liked him, and money was not the only thing that made him happy. They went up to the second floor and entered one of the rooms. Marion immediately took out a swimsuit and went to change in the bathroom, thoughtfully locked the door. Tony changed his clothes right in the room so that when she came out of the bathroom, he was already ready. "Are we going to sleep here tonight?" he asked, devouring Marion with his eyes. She wore a netted summer tunic over her swimsuit, through which her half-naked body was clearly visible. "I don't know. Alice will tell me later," she answered. "Are we going to have fun?" "Let's go." Tony approached Marion and tried to hug and kiss her, but she immediately went to the door, not letting him do it. "They're waiting for us. Come quickly," she said and smiled. Tony followed her, not taking his eyes off her slender body. His body was beginning to react to the girl in a certain way, and he tried to distract himself from thoughts of her. Otherwise, he would get into a very awkward position, considering that he was wearing only swimming trunks. But Tony had brought a towel with him and decided to wrap himself in it to hide his violent reaction to Marion. It was certainly very cool and fun, but only about privacy with Marion in such a crowd of people was out of the question. But Tony still relaxed, enjoying the expensive drinks and appetizers, as well as music and entertainment. The people gathered were cheerful and positive, so he had a good time, hoping that at night his dreams would finally come true. But these expectations were not fulfilled either. Despite the fact that the house was large, it was not easy to accommodate such a large number of people. A separate room was out of the question, and he was sent to sleep on the first floor, where he shared a room with two men, and Marion with Alice and two other girls went to sleep on the second floor. "Where did you find such a frame?" asked Marion Alice as they settled in for the night. "At work, in the neighboring office works. Runs after me in the hope of putting me in bed," answered Marion. "He's pushing with all his might, but he's spending, in full confidence that he can buy me. It is obvious that not from our circle, but with inflated self-esteem," said Alice. "It's fun to watch him. Don't you feel sorry for him?" "Sometimes I do. He's completely brain dead from wanting to fuck me. He's a small-minded fellow. He's already blabbed at work that we had a thing, but soon he'll be laughed at for his imagination. So send him in. He's not drooling for nothing. I'll talk to him when I get back. He asked to come here with me, and I decided to give him a chance to rest, so to speak, as a compensation for unjustified hopes and expenses. I wonder about men like that. Here eyes are there, you see who is in front of you and climb or rather rut like tanks, thinking that he, a horse like that, can something to burn out with a girl like you. It's ridiculous. You have to choose for yourself and not try to do things that mere mortals can't do." Well, he doesn't see himself that way. Macho. Not everyone can give an objective assessment of himself. My friend works in the same office with him. She's in love with him. Very nice woman, a little overweight and with a child, but not scary at all. And a good person. You should hear how he talked about her. He thinks he's way above her. How is he superior? In my opinion, he is not worthy of her. Marion said before going to bed. "Oh, girls, there are plenty of stooges like that," said their mutual acquaintance Anna. "They see a pretty girl and immediately flow from all places. Quit these fun, Marion, or he'll turn out to be a psycho. He'll do something that won't be tolerated. Like at Dasha's, remember, a couple of years ago, one such sucker slit his wrists." The girls all crinkled up. "Yeah, God forbid. That's really sick," answered Marion. "I'll talk to him as soon as we get back." "And with Billy never saw again?" suddenly asked Alice, and Marion immediately changed in the face. "No, Sasha said that he is divorced and moving to Washington, but I don't want to see him," she said. "That's great news. Why don't you make up?" "You two were such a great couple," Alice asked. "We were. He left me then, even though he promised to divorce me. It's over between us." "Oh, Marion, where could you find a better one? And it was you who sent him away. Your last one was jealous. This one was nothing. And Billy is a real man. I'll tell you a secret. A lot of people envied you, even me." Alice sighed dreamily. "Only he's married. I'm surprised that his leech finally got off and gave her a divorce. Probably still grabbed half of everything that does not belong to her. That's for sure. Who wants to leave empty-handed? The important thing is that he's free now. Well, since you don't need him anymore, I guess I'll take him." Alice looked slyly at her friend and laughed when she threw a pillow at her. "I'll do it for you," Marion replied and threw a second pillow at her friend. "That was to prove it," Alice said, throwing the pillows back at Marion. The next day was even more intense than the first. In the first half of the day, the whole company went to the sea, where there were rides on a banana, a water tube, a scooter, a game of beach volleyball. A separate piece of beach was set aside for them, and Tony had no idea how much such a birthday celebration could cost. They spent about 5 hours there, and then moved on to Alice's house. Toward evening, tables were set up outside, bursting with delicacies, and then there was live music and a foam disco right by the pool. Tony decided not to deny himself anything, because when else would he be able to attend such an event? "And your golfer is getting into the taste," laughing said Alice, watching Tony drinking a 2015 San Leonardo in the company of two of Alice's friends. "And it looks like he's found some new bodies that he can't afford and doesn't have the stature for." "I bet he is," He's never been to a party like this before, Marion replied. The next morning after breakfast, it was time to leave this paradise, which Tony did not want to leave. Did you like it? Asked Marion, noticing how longingly he looked at Alice's house as they drove off. I don't know. It was great. I've never had such a vacation, he said. I only wish I could have been alone with you. Marion just smiled and looked out the window without answering. When they returned to Washington, Tony took the car from the parking lot, and on the way home Marion fell asleep. She woke up when Tony's car stopped. Where are we? She asked, looking out the window and realizing that he hadn't brought her home. My place, he said and pulled a ring out of his pocket. Thought about proposing to you, but there was no way. Marry me. Marion clapped her eyes in amazement. Tony, are you serious? She asked. Of course I am, he replied. Tony, I'm sorry, but no. We're totally wrong for each other. I wanted to talk to you about the fact that nothing will happen between us and we won't see each other again. Tony went pale. I don't get it. You gave me hope and now you're telling me we're not going to see each other. Well, we've been talking, getting to know each other, so I came to that conclusion. And I don't love you, she said. Huh. Tony grinned nervously. You're throwing me. Everything inside him began to boil with anger. Dynamic for so long and now you're in the bushes. That long? You sound like months. Let's just go our separate ways. Do you have any idea how much money I blew on you? He yelled. Oh, is that the reason I have to spread my legs for you? Do I look like a prostitute to you? You're worse. He put the ring in his pocket and looked at Marion hatefully. Why did you call me? And this ring costs almost my entire salary, not to mention other expenses. Well, you asked for it, and I did not ask you for the ring, as well as the rest. Now you've shown your nature, which I've already seen. I don't want such a man, she answered rudely. What kind of man do you want? Who will pour millions into you and not fuck you? He almost shouted. Nobody asked you to pour anything into me. By the way, I'll pay you back for the ticket. And for the rest, then give it to me, he roared. Marion laughed. That's all love is, she said. You're going to laugh that I'll fuck you right in the car, he said, and Marion immediately pulled the door handle to get out, but the doors were locked. All you wanted was one thing, all the thoughts in your pants. Just because you tried to buy me doesn't mean I'm for sale. Open the door, she said, giving him a searing look. First, let's go to my place and do what we should have done a long time ago, he said. I'm not going anywhere and I don't owe you anything. Tony unlocked the doors and got out of the car first. Marion also hurriedly left the car, and Tony took her by the arm and dragged her to his driveway. Let go, horny, she said and kicked him in the knee. Bitch, he wheezed, immediately letting her go and lifting his leg to stroke his knee. Get my suitcase and I'll call a cab. Tony went back to the car and opened the trunk, threw Marion's suitcase out of it, and then wandered to his driveway, throwing a few insults at the girl. Marion called a cab and Tony pulled out a bottle of vodka as soon as he entered the apartment. He was close to hysterical and was shaking with anger. After drinking several shots of vodka, he sat down at his computer and started looking for a prostitute who looked like Marion and was cheaper than Sveta. In an hour or so, he was already making out with Nadia. To Mariana, she was certainly far away, but $200 for 3 hours. The girl worked off her money with more than enough, but Tony felt better only physically, and on the soul was incredibly nasty. He still wanted Marion, no matter what. Marion got out of the cab, and Billy came out of the black Range Rover parked outside her driveway, holding a huge basket of flowers. Marion froze in place, looking at the man, and he hurried toward her. Hi, he said with a smile, handing her the flowers. I missed you so much. Marion definitely turned away. Hi, why did you come? She asked, trying to cope with the excitement that overwhelmed her at this moment. To finally marry the woman I love, he answered. It was beyond her strength to resist, and Marion tearfully threw herself on his neck, and Billy immediately hugged her tightly, kissing her neck. Monday. Tony came to work in a nasty mood. He'd shouted Harvey down as soon as he'd opened his mouth to ask how the weekend had gone. He hadn't seen Marion since morning or lunchtime. She must have taken some more time off, he thought, and picked up his phone. He twirled it around in his hands, wondering what to write to her, but he couldn't find the words. Putting the phone aside, Tony tried to concentrate on his work, but he kept seeing her in her bikini and the mesh tunic she'd been wearing the day they'd arrived in Chicago. Tuesday. Tony had just parked outside the business center when he saw Marion step out of the black Range Rover that had just pulled up. But what caught his attention more was the man who opened the car door for her and gave her his hand. He looked to be a little over 30 years old and very presentable. It was clear that he was a rich man. Tony did not hide from the way Marion looked at this macho man. She had never looked at him like that. The man hugged her with one hand and lightly kissed her on the lips, and then she went to the entrance to the business center. The girl was glowing and seemed to light up everything around her with her beauty and charming smile. Tony immediately followed her and barely managed to jump in the elevator, in which, to his joy, except for Marion, there was no one. "Who is it?" Tony asked, drilling her with a stern look. "The one who will beat your face in if you bother me," she answered dryly. "You found a richer fool." "Nothing. He'll find out what a dynamo you are. He'll run away at once." With a sneer, he said, "Tony, calm down. Be a man and accept my rejection with dignity. I don't have any respect for you." "When will you get the money back?" he asked. "I changed my mind after all the time I wasted on you, and you turned out to be worse than I thought." The elevator doors opened. "Get out," said Marion to Tony, who was blocking her way to the elevator exit. "Are you serious with him?" Tony was mad with jealousy and had no idea what to do, no idea what he was saying. Marion stepped out of the elevator and stopped, looking at Tony pityingly. "More than that, he's a real man. I love him, and we're getting married soon. And of course I didn't ditch him. Tony, find someone on the same level as you. And don't cry. I'll pay you back for the ticket and the underwear." Without waiting for an answer, Marion went to her office, and Tony looked after her for a while. His eyes suddenly twitched nervously and his hands trembled. This is it, he thought. There was nothing more he could do, and this woman would never be with him. His dreams of her remained dreams. 3 months later, Marion married Billy and quit her job, working there only 2 weeks after she returned. She now helps her husband with the business, making 4 times as much as Tony. And she paid him back the money for her ticket to Chicago and her underwear. Tony still gave the ring back to the store, although it took a lot of nerve, because jewelry cannot be returned. He has already found a new job and in a couple of days will leave this business center, because after his unsuccessful affair with Marion, there were some bad rumors about him. Veronica was still fond of Tony, despite the fact that Marion had said some unpleasant things about him. However, Veronica did not refuse to socialize with other men, and soon she was to meet one of the employees of Billy's firm. Mariana's goal was to find Veronica a fiancé, and their senior manager liked the woman. In fact, she liked him from the photo. Veronica realized that Tony would never look in her direction, but life must be arranged. At the new place of work, Tony immediately paid attention to Elizabeth. Slender, long-legged brown girl, by type reminiscent of Marion, stood out against the background of the other female employees of the office. The girl agreed to have dinner with him in a cafe, which he himself had chosen. And this time he would be lucky, he thought, anticipating the upcoming stormy night in the arms of the beauty. That's what happens when you don't choose for yourself and think with your head. Tony's image is not fiction, but is based on a very real person. Of course, I made some adjustments, but the essence remains unchanged. And besides Tony, there are enough people who divide others into levels, unable to objectively assess their own. All men like stunning beauties, but not everyone can get one.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.